sure.
I do still think that this really marks an end of an era for Star
Yeah.
Wars. I think that
So this week we had some very, very interesting Marvel news with the release of a certain trailer. Brandon, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Brandon, have you seen the new Ironheart trailer?
I've seen it, I think 3 times at this point. Honestly, for it releasing in, like, barely a month, I mean, technically, this is the 2nd trailer, but, like, there's been no love for this show. They wanna roll this show out and get it over with. Like, I forgot if it wasn't for the fact that we've been planning out content for the future, I would have forgotten that this show was coming out, to be totally honest with you, and I think Marvel,
Yeah.
like, doesn't care about it,
Well,
which
and
sucks because I think it's a cool concept.
well, and they went through the same thing with Echo. I remember when Echo came out. It was like 2 years after Hawkeye actually aired. Nobody even remembered who that character really was, and everybody was really just waiting for Daredevil Born Again. Nobody was really
Yeah.
wanting the show with the character who was in Hawkeye. And I'm not saying it was a bad character. No different here than, Riri Williams as Ironheart, but it's just nobody's really as interested in it. And I think Marvel kind of knows that. And this was like part of that previous, like prior to them saying, hey, we're going to halt the brakes. We're going to actually put out good content as opposed to just a lot of content. This was a part of that like previous line of this is what we want to do, but we've already filmed it. So we're just going to kind of put it out
Yeah.
there and whatnot.
Well,
And so, yeah.
and I think the original concept that, like, my understanding of why they're making this is because clearly I talked about this with actually friends the other day. I don't know if we talked about this on podcast, but they're very clearly building to Young Avengers with the end credit scene of Miss Marvel. That's like very clearly
Sure.
where they're building. I believe it was Miss
Sure.
Marvel's end credit scene. But they need an Iron Man originally, from what I heard, and I don't know if this is confirmed, it was supposed to be Iron Lad, which if you don't know, Iron Lad is a kid variant of Kang the Conqueror. And now that
Yeah.
Kang the Conqueror is no more, they can't go with Iron Lad because
Yeah.
that would screw things up with their plan. So it feels like kind of like they're pushing they filmed this show kind of like and are pushing it out in I'm assuming the end credit scene of this is going to be similar to what happened with Kate Bishop, where it's like, oh, come join us with the Young Avengers, and that's going to be a big part of Doomsday and Secret Wars. With all the different Avengers teams, you'll have the Avengers, you'll have the new Avengers, and you'll have the Young Avengers, and the Fantastic Four, and the X-Men. It's going to be a bigger crossover than even Endgame was, honestly, and I'm curious to see how they
Yeah.
pull that off. But
Well, obviously, it's a bigger crossover. They're bringing back actors from the 2002 X-Men movie, X2. They're like Alan Cumming,
yeah,
Rebecca Romijn, James friggin' Marsden. They are bringing back
yeah,
that original lineup. And again, they're still not done announcing, so I would not be surprised if Famke Jensen and Halle Berry show up. I yes, and I don't know if at the end of Ironheart we'll actually get a post-credit scene or not, because we did get one at the end of the Marvels. I think there is a very big possibility, because this is what I've like heard, and I don't know necessarily I want to see it, but I heard that what it's going to be is Star-Lord is going to kind of be the mentor figure or the figure head of the Young Avengers. Like he's not a part of the team, but he's just like leading the group of kids. And what's going to happen is at the end of Doomsday, obviously, big spoiler, even though we all know it's coming, is they're going to lose some way, some form, and the Young Avengers are going to have to step in to do something. I don't necessarily know if I want that. Like, I actually,
I
am,
don't.
I don't.
I don't.
I don't care enough to
I
see that.
honestly would be totally fine if the end of, like you said, is I am assuming this is going to be an Infinity War Endgame situation if they lose in Doomsday and then they pick back up in Secret Wars. And I would actually not be against the idea of the Young Avengers being the ones that have to step in place of all the other Avengers that maybe they get sent to Battle World, maybe whatever happens. But I'm not really looking for. I wouldn't love the idea of Star-Lord being the head of that, because it's never really been the case in the comics. You've never really had like an adult leading. It's always been the Young Avengers. I actually own the first appearance of the Young Avengers. They're a very new team. I have
Yeah.
the comic book sitting in my room. And it is obviously it's a different lineup, slightly, very similar, but
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think going back to specifically talking about, I know we said before we didn't really have much to talk about with this before we hit record, but the one thing that I am curious to see is the Hood, the character of the Hood.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of like almost confirmed rumors that we're gonna get like so in Agatha all along, we got the first confirmation of like Lady Death and Mephisto and
Yeah.
things like that. There's been a
Yeah.
lot of talk that Mephisto is gonna play a really big role in Ironheart, bigger than we even realized, maybe even being the big bad, the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. And
Yeah.
that could be very interesting because
It
this
could be
show is going to
interesting,
be a
but
very big mix between technology and magic. The magic being with the
yeah.
Hood and the technology being with Ironheart. But
Yeah.
I think my problem is I don't think they cared enough about this show to make that interesting. Like I'm going in with as clear expectations, not trying to look down and not trying to look up, but I don't know. Again, it feels like a show that they're not super confident in, which hurts my expectations of what the show can be.
Well, and I'll also add, like, I like Mephisto a lot. I think he is genuinely one of the coolest of all the Marvel villains they've actually, like, created. I would hate unless it's, just like a setup thing, hey, Mephisto's out there. We're showing him in this show just to set up like he's out there. I don't want him to be defeated, similar to like an Ant-Man Kang type thing. Like Ant-Man never should have defeated Kang. Ant-Man should have died in
Mhm.
that movie. And technically, because obviously with everything that's happened and Jonathan Majors not returning, that will more than likely be the end of Kang. We're never going to see that character again. And it's kind of like one of
Yeah.
those things where it's like, I don't like that Ant-Man defeated him. It's really stupid that he did. At the end, that was actually one of the things I defended at the end of that movie was, hey, he is coming back. He didn't technically defeat him. He just, stopped him in his tracks where he was for that moment. But obviously that King we knew and in that moment was going to come back. He was the big bad. We know Ant-Man didn't actually defeat him. I mean, that was the whole point at the end of
Yeah.
the movie. Scott literally pondered with himself. Was like, I did to stop him, right? Right. And it was kind of this playful thing with the audience. And I think it's something similar here is if Mephisto's in Ironheart and they do something very similar to that, for me personally, that's going to leave a bad taste in my mouth because I do think Mephisto can do a lot in this universe. And I think that he has a massive role to play. And I just don't want to see him wasted in that regard. Um,
Yeah.
but something that like,
Well, and I
this does like I do like that you brought up Hood because there is a lot to unpack with his character. I liked his character when he was in Moon Knight. For that, I think it was like just one episode, right?
was he in Moon Knight?
Hood was in Moon Knight or I might be thinking of
It's been a
somebody else.
while since you might be thinking of someone else. I don't think he's appeared in Moon. It's been a while since I watched it as it released, but I
Sure.
but one thing I wanted to say, and this is where I feel like my feelings on a lot of the upcoming Marvel movies is so difficult because there's obviously the very, very heavy rumors that we're gonna get a reset of the Marvel universe after Secret Wars.
Yeah.
That's gonna reset
Yeah.
everything. And I think that really colors my opinion on like how they treat characters moving forward because I would love to, like Mephisto. Like here's the reason why. Like MODOK. MODOK's a perfect example. MODOK has a really big presence in the Marvel comic books. MODOK's never coming
MODOK.
back in the MCU for many reasons. He's never coming back in this
Mm,
iteration of the MCU. I would love to him to be a more recurring villain, but I think that's one of the difficult parts with the difference between the comic books and the movies is the comic books are very villain of the week style with a lot unless you have your big
sure.
crossovers, it's a lot of villain of the week. You can't really do that as easily and have your villains come back because in a movie format, you want that big triumphant moment of defeating the bad guy and making it feel
Sure.
permanent. In the comic
Sure.
books, you don't really need that as much. Like personally, I don't really need like a oh he's dead, villain you killed the villain type of thing. Like I do have
Right.
some
Yeah.
problems with villains not being killed, but there is a big difference between the way you treat a villain and how you handle their defeat in a comic book and how you handle it in a movie. And maybe that's a podcast topic we can talk about like later down the line when there's nothing releasing is like how we would do an adaptation of the MCU or even just comic books in general of like understanding the nuances of this is how it reads on paper, this is how it reads in a movie.
Sure. Sure, yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up MODOK specifically because God damn it, man.
Yeah,
MODOK
like, it was so
is one of the
unfortunate.
he's one of the most I wouldn't even say like it's interesting. He's just one of the biggest minds for a Marvel character. And
Yeah,
they actually did something very interesting with him in Quantumania, which is set up, okay, Derek, who was the Yellow Jacket, after his fight with him, and he became MODOK. That's actually a great idea. And
yeah.
then they completely fuck it up by
Butchered the CGI.
well, honestly, the CGI, even as like a joke, like I was fine with it if it was for a joke, but then they made the entire rest of him a joke. They didn't
Yeah,
take any bit of him seriously at all and played him off for laughs, which that's never been MODOK. Yeah, you can have fun with MODOK and you can have things to laugh at with him because there is, a lot of fun things to be had with that character. But if it's solely the purpose that he's in your film for and he's just a lackey for somebody who, in all honesty, he really is smarter than, like MODOK is technically supposed to be smarter than Kang in a lot of ways. It diminishes that character and honestly the respect for that character. That's why Quantumania
yeah.
has like it leaves a really bad taste in my mouth, is for like
Well,
moments like that.
because I want just one last thing to say on that before we move on, because we have a lot to talk about this week. I think
Yes, we do.
MODOK dies at the end of Quantumania, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly. Like,
he
he's
does.
dead. What I would
Yeah.
have loved to see is MODOK not dying at the end of Quantumania. Maybe he becomes like scarred and even more deformed than he was at the end of that movie, which then twists his mind and turns him more into the MODOK that we know from the comic books. And I think that's maybe how they could have been like, oh, we know MODOK's a really goofy character. Here's the really goofy, us acknowledging that MODOK's really goofy, but here's also us giving you what you want out of MODOK with this scene where at the end of it we build him up to come back and actually be more menacing and more not grotesque, but like look more like the MODOK we know.
Right. Don't just like have I use quotations here for those listening and not watching, but let's not have him have a redemption arc at the very end
Yeah.
and turn
Yeah,
into a
that's
joke of,
exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
at least I died an Avenger. No, you didn't. And you wouldn't even think that yourself. Okay, maybe that iteration
Yeah.
of the character would, because that iteration of MODOK is a friggin' idiot. But no, man. In regards to Ironheart, look, I never judged anything until I actually see it, but I'm already judging really hard, and I don't really think this show is probably going to go the way people want it to, and I think Marvel
It's
knows that.
probably I feel like it's probably gonna rank up there with Echo for me because, like, I wasn't low on Echo, but I feel like Echo was one of those shows that was kinda like a you can skip it type of thing. And I feel like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, this feels like, especially again, back to how Marvel is treating the show, it feels like even Marvel is acknowledging this is a you can skip it show.
Well, and I think this is the last thing I'll say on it because the Echo and Ironheart are going to go hand in hand. And I honestly I can make a prediction and be very strong in this statement about it. And I love Ryan Coogler, and I think he both wrote and directed this. I don't even know if he can say
No,
this.
he's producing.
Oh,
He's
he's producing
executive
it.
producer.
Oh,
He's
that's
I don't know if
worse.
he's executive producer or producer, but he's not director or writer, at least for the whole show. He is
That's worse for the show
producer.
then. That was my only hope, was that Ryan Coogler was writing and directing. I didn't realize he wasn't. Yeah, no, that's bad. That actually puts less faith for me with that. But I think that this show, similar to Echo, will be it's not bad, it's not good, but it's completely forgettable, and you will forget to even rank it on a tier list. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna
Yeah.
sit there, you're gonna rank things from the MCU and go, "Oh yeah, that was a thing. Oh well, I guess I just forgot to add it." You know. But with that being said, I think enough about Ironheart. Let's just hop straight into it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, come one, come all. Welcome to another episode of the Nerdy Nimrods podcast, the only podcast in the world where your two favorite Nimrods talk all things nerdy. I'm your co-host this evening, Carson, aka Juggernaut,
Brandon, aka Parrotfish.
and today we are talking about one of my favorite action franchises of all time. We are ranking and reviewing the Mission Impossible franchise. Brandon, talk to me, baby. How we doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. We'll talk about this more when we get to the actual ranking itself, because we have a lot of stuff we need to talk about before then. Obviously, the main one being Andor's ending, which, man, do we have so many thoughts on that. But so this has been a week because I rewatched all 7 Mission Impossible movies this week, on top of watching all the other stuff that we post on our TikTok, because we've talked about this. We're going to cut down on some of the shows, the amount of shows that we talk about on the podcast, and a lot of that's going to stay in our short form content.
Yeah.
We are talking about other ideas. I'm not going to say any of them here because they're not definitive, but we have some other ideas for expanding the content. But the main one for now is going to be short form. So I posted a bunch of short form this week, and I rewatched all 7 Mission Impossible movies. So it's been a busy. I've absorbed a lot of that. Was like 16 hours nearly of Mission Impossible movies on top of everything else. And mind you, I did not start watching the Mission Impossible movies until Tuesday night after the gym. There was one night I was up until like 2 o'clock in the morning. I watched 3 Mission Impossible movies that night, back to back to back.
Honestly, that's not like horrible though, especially if you're watching like the right Mission Impossible movies. You can have a baller night watching those. Being
True.
completely honest.
True.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
true.
you did.
But
You
how
did a
are you
lot of
doing?
watching. No,
Yeah.
look, man, I'm good. It's been a long 2 weeks, especially because last week we already talked about on the podcast how I was insanely busy, and that's why we were recording on like a very specific time and deadline, and we had to be done at a certain time. This week, I'm getting over sickness, but I'm slowly recovering. I'm very excited for the final reckoning.
Yeah.
Especially after watching a good portion of these films. Unlike Brandon, I have seen all these movies. So I only rewatch the ones that I haven't like watched again in a long time. So I didn't watch as much as he did. But I did partake in rewatching the entire franchise. And boy, howdy, do I have some things to say about some of this franchise.
Yeah. Well, because that's the thing. I did not realize that I had only watched Ghost Protocol. The only Mission Impossible movie that I had seen was Ghost Protocol. I thought I had watched a lot more of these movies. And maybe it's just that I watched them with my dad when I was younger and I don't remember them as much. That's totally possible because there were certain elements that I remembered of a few of them. But the only one that I sat down and watched and was like, no, I remember watching this movie was Ghost Protocol.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I did a full rewatch, because I would not have remembered enough to rank them. And honestly, they're just, I mean, we'll get into this more. Most of them are enjoyable movies.
Yeah, I just looked because I wanted to remember exactly which ones I actually rewatched. Again, it's been a weird week. But yeah, I rewatched all 3 of the I guess technically originals. I rewatched Ghost Protocol. I skipped Rogue Nation because I had just rewatched it not more than 6 months ago. I rewatched Fallout because it's been a while since I've seen that, but I do remember loving that one. And then I didn't watch Dead Reckoning because I literally watched that last month.
Yeah.
Not for the first time. I just wanted to rewatch Dead Reckoning. So yeah. But we're here. We're good. We got everything. Pretty much. We got, for the most part, everything in our heads. We're getting there. We're trucking along. We're gonna do great with this ranking.
But I have so many notes on these movies. It's actually insane. I mean, taking notes on a 2.5-hour movie is wild. I'm not even going to be able to reference most of them because it's just pages of notes, like pages.
Yeah, I'm just gonna talk about what I like, what I don't like, and then you can add more if you want, especially because you haven't seen some of these.
Yeah, and then more of a first-time watch perspective as opposed to a
Sure.
seasoned fan. Yeah.
And then there is one other thing I feel like we both should say on the podcast that we're very excited about, that we have determined we are doing, which is we do plan to attend New York Comic-Con in October, which is very, very exciting.
To
I
be
don't
honest, I
think
wasn't sure where you were going with this because I was like, there's a few things that we've been talking about, but what if we officially determine? I know, yeah, on June
that one we
15th,
can talk about.
tickets go on sale. I will be buying me and Carson tickets to New York Comic-Con. I have never been. Obviously, I love conventions. Conventions are my favorite thing in the world. I actually used to run one. I ran a convention for 3 years. Over 2,000 attendees each year. It was a huge deal. back in Florida when I still lived there, and conventions are like one of my favorite things in the world. Obviously, we didn't. This was actually funny enough. We came up with the name of this podcast and kind of cemented everything at MegaCon Orlando this year, when we went together. And so conventions have a special place in my heart. I know they have a special place for both of us now. So we're going to be filming content. Our podcast for that week is actually going to be filmed and edited and posted from the hotel room in New York. So it's exciting.
Yeah, no, I look, it's the second biggest convention for all of nerddom, and at least I
Pretty
believe it
much,
is.
yeah. For general nerddom, it's one of. You have San Diego Comic-Con, I'd put at like the
That's
top
number
tier
one.
echelon.
That's
In
number
terms
one.
of like the amount, the weight of the announcements, and you have Hall H and things of that
Right.
nature, it's San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah.
MegaCon's actually bigger in terms of attendance than San Diego Comic-Con, but again, you don't have your Disneys and things like that making announcements at MegaCon. New York Comic-Con is closer to that San Diego than it is to a MegaCon. I don't know about attendance wise. I know in terms of there will probably be some big announcements that me and Carson will get to see live in person together. That again, we'll post content about. We'll probably post. I don't know what we're gonna do. We still need to determine that, but you'll definitely see like probably hallway reactions right out of panels from us in terms of like, oh shit, they just announced this thing and we need to talk about it now. So dude, I am so excited.
We just shook Tom Holland's hand. Here's our live
I
reaction.
would die. I would pass away, simply die.
You would probably commit a crime and just try to kidnap him, in all honesty. And I wouldn't stop you.
No. I would give him a hug. I would absolutely hug Tom Holland. Sorry, Zendaya, but
let's go ahead and jump into today's podcast, though. Let's start with the one that I feel like you and I are not as excited to talk about as much as Andor, which is Last of Us. Brandon.
I mean, okay. I think saying not as excited as Andor is correct, but I enjoyed this episode.
Oh no, I'm not saying anything bad about it.
I know a lot of people aren't as high on this episode as other episodes, but I enjoyed. It was definitely not as strong as last week. I'll say that. It was definitely not as strong. I know this episode had a lot of very big in preface this, just the one preface we give. Everything we talk about from this point forward for Last of Us, for Andor, and for the Mission Impossible movies are going to be full of spoilers. If you have, we'll always say the name of what we're talking about before we get into spoilers to the best of our ability. But if you haven't seen any of those, skip around. There will be timestamps in the description so you can jump around. But if you have not seen any of this and you still want to give us a listen, don't click away or just go watch it and come back. But that is the one and only warning for spoilers you will get for the entire episode. Because in this episode, there was a lot of big things that happened. This episode, we didn't see Tommy on screen, but we got technically the confirmed return of Tommy.
We got the confirmation that he did go out with Jesse.
Because exactly. Which is I know a huge I shouldn't say it's a huge change from the video game. Obviously it is, but it's kind of that role reversal that we talked about in previous episodes of you have Dina and Ellie going out first and then Jesse and Tommy going out and looking for them, as opposed to the other way around of Tommy going out by himself. Jesse wasn't with him when he went out, from my understanding, but you still had Ellie and Dina go after him.
Which really opens the conversation of, where's the rest of this going to go for his character? Because again, when Tommy goes out in the game, it's for revenge, and they're playing catch up with Tommy more so than what they're doing in the show. So this could go one of two ways. One's like more unlikely in my mind is Tommy and Jesse went their separate ways, and he told Jesse like, hey, don't worry about finding me. I'll play my way back and like get the girls back to Jackson, which very well could be a thing. And then he goes out for revenge as opposed to Ellie, because he, for whatever reason, in his own mind is like, I don't really care if I live or die. I want to avenge my brother.
I don't think that plays into the Tommy that we know. With him having a kid,
not to the Tommy that they've built up
and things like that.
Right. Not to the Tommy that they've built up in the show. In the show, what's more likely going to happen is they'll all four reconnect, and then they'll all kind of travel together, and Tommy will get more, like, I guess, vengeful as like it goes further and further. But I don't think we'll ever see like a complete separation, and that really will change the entire game trajectory more so than it already has, which is that they'll all four pretty much be
Yeah.
together. Uh,
Yeah, well, because we
from
only have 2 episodes left as well, as we've talked about, and it looks like next
Yeah.
week's episode is gonna be a full flashback. Like, maybe the last 5 minutes or maybe the ending of it will be not flashback, but it
Right.
looks like the next episode is gonna be just a bunch of Joel and Ellie flashbacks based on now we have absolute confirmation that Ellie knows what happened at the hospital at the end of the first series when you have the
Right.
conflict with Nora.
Well, and again,
And I
if
know
you've
we're
played the
jumping around a
game,
lot, we're jumping straight to
no,
the
yeah.
end, but
Well, and we'll jump back and we'll talk about the things we really liked because I know we were there. But like specifically talking about like next week's episode, I do think that like, and like talking about the series as a whole, I feel like from the beginning that Ellie knows. It's just like now you, especially if you play the game, but like now you
yeah,
really have confirmation. Like, okay, she clearly knows something because now she's thinking about
yeah.
this
Well,
specific
because
moment
she
in time.
said specifically when she was looking at Nora
Yeah,
right before she beats her with a pipe, "I know."
yeah.
After she's
Well,
like, "Do you
yeah,
know what your dad did? Do you know that he killed everyone? Did you know that he killed that doctor?" And she's like, "I know." And it was like, "Oh, shit." And that rage in her eyes when she said it or I shouldn't even say rage. When she said it, it was more of a like, "I know and I don't care," that then flipped into rage that then went
yeah,
into beating Nora.
yeah. And then I'm assuming at the end of next episode, we will get the full play out of that after the flashback's done and whatnot. Which
Yeah,
makes,
I'm curious to see because like I was expecting more out of the conflict with Nora and Ellie, and I'm curious to see maybe that's where we end next episode. Like we get a good chunk of flashbacks, like we get a whole episode of flashbacks, and then that last 5 minutes is the end of the Nora Ellie. Like we flash back to them, and then we end the episode with her reconnecting with Dina and Tommy and them. That's just an
yeah.
assumption, but I wouldn't be shocked if that's the direction they go.
Well, and hopping back to the beginning of the episode, because this is really where my biggest problem with the episode was the pacing of like the first 20-25 minutes of this episode was so extremely off and
Yeah,
slow. Like we had a lot of character building with Ellie and Dina last episode. I'm not saying I don't like it. I do, but I don't need to see more if it's kind of like needless. Like we've already
I
seen,
mean,
a
I
bunch of this.
disagree. I don't think it was needless because I think one of the biggest things that I have in my notes, that I do feel like really builds out Dina's character is you have the scene with finding out about her first kill.
Yeah.
And then you have the right after finding out about like their first kill, I think it gives us a really interesting perspective into how Dina views their current mission. Because up until this
Yeah.
point, it really feels like Dina is going on this, yes, because she wants revenge, but she's also just going to look out for Ellie. And you get that
Oh, yeah.
confirmation now that no, Dina wants revenge just as bad as Ellie does, which again makes sense because I don't know about the video game, but at least in this version, Dina viewed Joel as a father figure. I mean, her family, as we found out in this episode,
Yeah.
was killed by a single raider that then Dina killed at 8 years old, which sent her
Yeah.
on the current path that she's on, which, like, no 8-year-old should ever have to, one, walk in on finding their family dead, and two, have to
Right.
kill a grown man. And
Right.
that
Dina.
recontextualizes a lot of what we know about Dina, who's always, I don't want to say
Yes.
always been, but is really that light. It's that contrast to Ellie, where Ellie isn't dark, but you can definitely tell there's a lot more darker tones to Ellie than there is to Dina. Dina's always
Sure.
that more positive, that more
Right.
bubbly, that more happy character. This is the first moment where we see her take that more dark step in saying, "No, I would hunt them down. If I did not kill that raider, I would still be hunting him down until he got what he deserved." Which is exactly what Ellie is
Sure.
doing now with Abby.
Right. Okay. Well, then let me take my advice because it wasn't like exactly like I wasn't trying to say it was completely needless. Like things like that are fine. I just thought it was dragged out a little bit too much. And you could have cut off at least a solid 10 minutes of runtime to the episode. And don't get me wrong, I want to spend as much time in this world as possible, because I don't kill me. Everybody in the comment section, do not kill me. So far, I like the way they set up the world in the show a lot better than they did in the game. I like the way they set up certain characters better than they did in the game. As a whole, I do think I like season 2 of the show better than the actual video game. There are things about
Oh,
the
I
game,
thought you were
obviously,
about to say better than season 1. Okay, better than
no,
the
no,
video
no, no,
game.
no, 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 no,
Fair.
no.
I thought you were
I
about to
think
say
that,
better than season 1, and I was like, look, I'm loving season 2. I'm a big season 2 defender. Season 1's still better, but we also haven't gotten the end of season 2 yet. And I feel like it's also, and this is something that is very like important to realize, I think, when it comes to the pacing of this show or this season, is episode 1 covered an entire video game. It covered an entire video game that takes like about 15 to 16 hours to play through in one season. This is covering a portion of a second video game that takes 30 hours to complete. So you're talking about 2 to 3 seasons to cover one video game, as opposed to the original where you only got one video game in one season. So it is going to shift your perspective on pacing drastically, because you can't compare it to season 1. And I know you're not. I'm just saying in general, like, there's going to be a huge difference to the way that this season plays out from a just story like pacing perspective than season 1 is. And even again, the video game.
Right. And I guess going back to the good, like, I think the acting in this episode is actually a friggin' phenomenal standout. I don't know what his name is, but the actor who plays Jesse just does a very good job. I believe, like, as far as like characters that look and sound like they were ripped straight from the game, he looks and sounds like he was ripped straight from the game. Like, he does a fantastic job. Again, haven't watched gameplay in a while, but from like the things I've seen prior to the season and even comparisons during, he does a really good job of making the character his own while at the same time being very similar to the one that was in the game. And he does a really good job, especially in this episode. Ellie, Bella Ramsey, and Isabella Merced Dina, they always do a good job.
Oh yeah.
It goes back to the first like 20 minutes. I just feel like you really could have cut out some of that for.
Well, because the first 20 minutes is really focused on Dina and Ellie back in, I think it's a library. I can't remember. Maybe it's a theater. But it focuses on the whole like map thing. You have the joke about Ellie not being school oriented.
Right.
They also are spending a lot of time making the plan for how to get into the building, which is the hospital, that long building that they're trying to get to, that'll lead them to where they're going, which is, I think it's like the watchtower or whatever it is.
Yeah. And that's what I'm okay with. I'm okay with them making a plan. I don't need a whole scene. It's really cool, and it shows how useful Dina is as a character. But I really didn't need the whole scene of her triangulating. It was like a 6-minute scene. I didn't need a 6-minute scene of her triangulating all of this and figuring out. You could have just said that, or shown like a smaller, even like minute to 30-second scene of her doing that, and we've gotten the same point across, and you still could have said this is how useful it is. And so it's just like,
I don't fully disagree. I mean, to be honest, any scene that Isabella Marced is in anything, I'm going to eat that, and I want more.
She's good.
She's because really good. She is a phenomenal actress. We've established this before.
She's really good.
But I feel like, and this is like, again, I'm not fully disagreeing with you. I think it could have been cut down a little bit, but I think what they're going for with that scene is really building upon the relationship and taking more time to focus on like making you care when stuff happens to Dina. And it also, and I think this scene, because soon afterwards you have that scene where they're walking through and Dina, you have that like pile of bodies, and Dina gets sick again because she's pregnant. And you have that, this is when you have the argument of that I believe people were upset wasn't in the last episode of, no, you should go back, you shouldn't be here, you're useless, like whatever that whole argument is. But I think the reason why that holds a lot more weight is because we just saw previously how useful Dina is to Ellie and how Ellie really would not make it without Dina. So when you have this argument of you should go back, you shouldn't be here, why am I taking you along? This is terrible. It to me holds a lot more weight because you just saw, okay, you want her to go back, but also you know deep down that you cannot do this without Dina. She's too useful.
Well, and the I guess combated argument to that is, and this is the argument that I guess you could technically have the game is Dina useful enough to keep around, or would you have sent her back to Jackson? But literally not more than 10 minutes after that argument, they're in this area with a bunch of stalkers, and Dina nearly dies.
Terrifying.
If it wasn't for Jesse showing up, Ellie, I don't know if Ellie would have died. That's a fun, thing to kind of discuss is, would Ellie have died just from getting like ripped apart, or would she have, what would have happened? Dina definitely would have died though if Jesse never showed up.
Oh yeah.
Like, dead. And so it does pose the really good question of Ellie has the argument of go back, this, that, and it's just it's interesting to see it. I did really like that for the most part. I thought that was really well done. I also love the comparison, and it kills me. Before you see who it is, Jesse offers Ellie the hand to help Ellie up, similar to what Joel did with Abby in episode 2. And it's the knight in shining armor thing, and it's like you don't know who it is, but it's
I don't know about you. I wasn't sure who it was gonna be. Like when you have the figure comes in and the gunshots start firing, I personally thought that this was gonna be the wolves. I thought that the wolves had heard the gunshots and were coming after them.
Sure.
That's what I thought, and my heart dropped.
That's easy to.
I think that was purposeful. That's purposeful.
That's purposeful. It's easy to assume that.
To feel scared and not know who it was.
It's very easy to assume that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. That's really my only complaint with the episode though. Everything I'm not saying cuz he shows up it's better, but pretty much everything after Jesse shows up in this episode, I was like, okay, this is kind of picking up a little bit. It's got a nicer pace. I loved everything between Ellie and Nora. That being said, the game definitely did the Ellie Nora scene better, which is funny considering the scene has the same dialogue.
And that's why I think that there must be a flash, like after the flashback, we have to go back to that because honestly, like a small complaint of mine was that scene in the sense of I just felt like we didn't get enough out of it. I don't know, for being obviously, and maybe this is purposeful, but like obviously she's after Nora for information. She actually doesn't really care about killing Nora right away. That's not her initial goal. Her initial goal is just to torture Nora to get information. But you can kind of tell that there's a switch that flips in Ellie of, oh, this revenge thing feels good, I'm gonna do that. Like that's when she gets a little bit more of starting to get a bloodlust and enjoy it more than just oh, I'm gonna go do this to avenge Joel.
Right. And it's just an important scene for Ellie's character, and it's gonna really set her up in season 3 specifically, because again, she's out there for revenge, and the whole thing, and this is the whole tale of the second game, is to not seek revenge, because it's just a cycle of revenge. One thing leads to another, and it leads to another. And at the beginning of this season, after Joel is dead, after Joel is killed, and she's reading this speech to Jackson, it's very polite, like, I don't want revenge, I just want to avenge and seek justice for what has been done. And Abby plays it really cool, and deep down there's this connection of, look, I do want this for revenge, and you can slowly see the build. This is the moment that you, as the gamer, or in this case for the TV show, the watcher, fully understand the scope of, no, this is full on revenge. There is nothing about justice, because you see just how far she's willing to go to get the information out of Nora. So much so that Nora tries to escape through this spore-ridden, infected area. But obviously this is before she realizes that Ellie, is, the immune girl that they were going to operate on.
Yeah.
But you'd see just how far that she's willing to go to get the information. And it's a perfect way to it's going to be a perfect way to end season 2 with the completion of, okay, no, Ellie's in it fully for revenge. There is nothing about vengeance. She will go and kill a
Yeah.
lot of
There's
people
there
to get what
there's
she
there's no there's no action she's not willing to take to get revenge. And
Sure.
I'm curious to see. I think we're gonna get a lot better idea of what this means and what this looks like after the flashback sequence that we're gonna get next episode. But does this stay as simply revenge for Joel? I'm curious to see, because again, there's kind of that bloodlust that starts to happen in Ellie when she's beating on Nora, and there, you can see there's kind of a switch that flips inside of her, and I'm curious to see how much of this stays as simply a revenge for Joel, and how much of it turns into something more and something else that means something different for Ellie and things like that, and how Dina
Sure.
and Jesse and Ellie now all being involved in this is going to play into that. Because
Yeah.
and this is like, I don't I would say another thing that is a little weaker for me in this season. I'm not going to say it's weak because I think it adds an interesting world building element. I just don't know where their goal, like the end goal of having the Scarface and Wolf like back and forth. Like I don't fully see what the end goal of that is going to be yet, and I think that's probably the point. But it does feel like a whenever it's there, it's like a, I don't want to say, oh, why is this happening? But it is like a interesting, it takes you away from the revenge plot. And it is, again, building out that world and building out who the wolves are and who the Scarface people are. But like, what's the point? Like, why aren't we just focusing on
Right.
that revenge journey? And I'm not saying that I'm not going to like it later. I just feel like I haven't really latched on to that narrative yet. Obviously, we
Sure.
did have the one scene where they were in the park where the wolves are too scared to go, and we saw that one wolf guy get hung. And then, so, dude, that was a gruesome scene. That was a horrific scene where
That was
he gets
bad.
hung by a noose on the neck, and they stab him with a thing. And I wasn't sure where they were going. I was like, oh, he's gonna like cut him and he's gonna die. No, they pull him up by the noose, and the sword just clean slices through him in his guts. I was like, oh my God. I mean, it harkens back to what we saw in the previous episode where we already saw them dead and hanging from the ceiling. Now we know how they do that. Now we know that
Yeah.
this is something they do ritualistically, it seems like, with
Yeah,
all the people around. It felt like a ritual.
for sure. The Seraphites, man, are really terrifying in this show. They're terrifying in the game, but they are very
Yeah.
terrifying. And again, it's just because there's things like when you're watching a show versus a video game, like it obviously it looks more real in a show than it does in a game. So it's terrifying. I will give it this. Props to all the special effect people who were
Oh
behind
yeah.
this episode. I mean, that it
Oh yeah.
is incredible what they were able to accomplish, especially with that kill specifically. Like that, it just looks so cool. Um,
Well,
and
because
the,
we
the
also had the stalkers. That scene was terrifying.
and
Like, I don't know
all
how
goes
much of
back
that
to
was
special effects.
practical versus not practical, but that scene in seeing one stalker, flashlight turns off, two stalker, flashlight turns
Right.
off, there's like 10 of them. That scene, it was, that was the, I don't want to say the first, but that was definitely the most horror, straight horror movie scene that we've gotten
Yeah.
in both seasons, honestly.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot more of these battles that we see with them, especially obviously with the Battle of Jackson and things, are a lot more large scale. This is
Right.
getting more, and I think it was last episode when we had with the train cars where there was like a shit ton of infected that came out.
Yeah.
I like this gets back to, yes, there was a lot of them, but it felt honestly more terrifying that there was less of them than just
Yeah.
a giant mob of
Yeah.
face things coming at you, it felt
Sure.
more terrifying that, oh, flashlight turns off, flashlight turns on, there's more. Like, that felt like
Sure.
a video game
Yeah.
sequence.
No, I completely agree with you on that. Yeah. And then I guess like obviously again this is jumping forward again, but next week's episode is going to be a very big flashback centered episode, and then we're probably going to end with Ellie finally killing Nora or whatever she's going to do. I don't know. They could change things. At this point, the show could really surprise me, and they could change a lot versus not changing a lot. I really don't know what could happen anymore. But we still technically have one more villain that they've like set up that they haven't necessarily done anything with, and I'm pretty sure they're going to do away with by the end of the season. And I just tried looking it up and I couldn't find it. But I don't even know if it's the right character, but the actor who plays Walking Torres in Brave New World and
Yeah,
Falcon and Winter Soldier, the new Falcon.
he's the one in the last episode during the torture scene that was
Yes.
outside of the room, and also the only
Yes.
one that wasn't grenaded, in that scene, in that opening sequence.
Based on how they're setting everything up, because obviously I think this whole season's going to end with a big Wolf Sarah fight, ending more so for the Wolves, Ellie against the Wolves, Tommy against the Wolves, all of them. He's probably dead. If they wait till season 3 to do that, I'm going to be very pissed, because also they have it ever since Joel's death, and I'm not upset about it. They really have done nothing with Abby. And I feel like they should give us like an inkling or a clue to something, you know?
Well, and that's why I'm pretty convinced that, given that we found out that next week's episode isn't going to focus on Abby, like we had talked about previously, that maybe these last 2 episodes that we're building up to are going to be a lot more Abby focused. I'm honestly leaning very, very heavily into next season being Abby's perspective of the video game. Because I think, from what I remember, from what I've heard, you play as Abby for a considerable portion of the video game. And I don't know when that switch happens. I don't know how much back and forth it is. I don't know how that breakdown works. But I'm leaning more and more into, we're going to conclude. I shouldn't say conclude, but we're going to get to, honestly, episode 7 might end with the beginning of a confrontation between Abby and Ellie, and that is going to end. And then next season, we'll pick up with Abby's perspective, and we're going to follow Abby throughout whatever her flashbacks are, whatever her sequences are. Because I would be shocked if they cut Abby and that whole back and forth out of the series entirely. Because, again, from what I've heard, that is a major portion of the video game, and what really makes you care about what happens to her at the end, which I don't even know I would assume she dies, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know if Abby dies. I don't know if she lives. I don't know what happens to her. So I'd be very curious to see where that goes.
Yeah. And, for all we know, they could announce a season 4. Like, I won't believe a whole, like, entire Abby season until they give confirmation for, like, a season 4. Because they did say it was going to be, like, 2 to 3 seasons for game 2, because they did want to.
There's been no confirmation how many seasons it'll be.
But there's been no confirmation. And I also, like, and this is just me being truthful, I don't know how that would go over, because, again, a game and a TV show, once the game's fully out, it's fully out. It's up to the player to play and get to the end, and that will determine how long it takes, but it's all there. Anybody can figure out how it ends. With a TV show, especially when Ellie, at this point, technically is the main character of the show, and you're following her story, to then transfer to a completely different character for an entire season, that honestly could tank whatever audience they have left, even if it's like, people who've played the game. Like, I don't know if they could follow an entire season. I reasonably believe they could follow maybe half a season, a few episodes. I don't see, because it is like a television format, I don't see them going the route where it could just be an entire season of Abby. Again, I'm willing to be proven wrong. I very well could be wrong, but that's just where I stand with it. But going back to the episode that we had this week, I think of all the episodes they've released thus far for season 2, this is definitely the weakest. again, not awful, not bad. It's just not great, which it's okay for a TV show to have okay episodes. Because sometimes you got to have
I mean,
that.
it's difficult because this is technically, I know it's 7 episodes, so there really isn't a halfway point. But this episode kind of is like the halfway point for this season. Like, it kind of feels
Sure.
like again, it's difficult because we only have 2 episodes left as opposed to like 3 episodes or something like that. But it does
Yeah.
feel like this is very much setting up to next episode is the Joel flashbacks, and then the episode after that is going to be, I think it's going to be like a big showdown that'll end on a very purposeful cliffhanger that will lead us
Yes.
into where season 3 goes. And I don't know if they've even started filming season 3, so I'm curious to see how long it is until we get a season 3 of this show.
Sure.
I know it's been
I mean,
greenlit
I
for a season
honestly,
3, but
and
I don't
I
know.
feel bad saying this. We might get season 3 sooner than we got season 2 purely because Pedro Pascal's not as heavily in the show anymore. Um, because
True,
I know
because his
that was
filming schedule, especially like Fantastic Four and things like that, would hold things up a lot more because I don't know. Like, I know that there's in the video game, there's a lot of Joel flashbacks throughout the game. I'd be curious to see if maybe we're
yeah,
compressing all of those flashbacks from across the game into this one episode. That's kind of what it feels like.
maybe. Well, I know I because we saw Joe Pantoliano, who plays oh god, Eugene. I think it's Eugene. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
Who is Gail's husband. We know he's in the episode. I don't think it's just gonna be Joel Ellie flashbacks. We'll get a lot of it, and we've seen that in the trailer, but it's also gonna focus on his character too and what Joel did to that character. And the reason I know it's gonna be a bigger episode is because Joe Pantoliano is a fantastic actor. You know, he's been in the Goonies. He was one of the villains in The Sopranos. He's just a Bad Boys. He's the police chief in Bad Boys. He's one of
Mhm.
those he's one of those actors who you don't just cast in a show and then immediately waste.
Yeah.
So they're gonna do something with that character. Um, and so I wouldn't be surprised if that's like a big portion of the episode is actually just what happens with Eugene, or if it's
I
more
mean, I feel like
focused
we've
on him.
pretty much gotten confirmation that we're gonna get a big section about Eugene. I don't think this is gonna be a Bill and Frank style episode. Like, I think a lot of people were talking about, like, oh, we're
No,
gonna get a
no,
Bill
no,
and
no, no,
Frank
no, no.
episode about Eugene. I don't think that's what this is gonna be whatsoever. But I do think that a big portion of this, because
Yes,
I wouldn't be surprised if Eugene's character being involved plays into how Ellie finds out about what happens.
that
Just
wouldn't be
based on the way
surprised.
that things are building out.
They could very well change it so that that's how it happens. And you know that that's how like the changes are. I very well could see that being a possibility, and I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But yeah, all in all, this episode, okay. If I ever rewatch the show, which I will at some point, obviously I'll rewatch it, but I'm never going to just watch this episode on its own, probably like I would episode 2 or the Bill and Frank episode. You know, not a standout, but not awful either. But I'm excited for next week because we get America's daddy, America's sweetheart, Pedro Pascal. We get him back. I'm very excited.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotta love Pedro Pascal. Just gotta love Pedro Pascal.
We had the biggest thing in Star Wars history happen just
That's one way to transition. Yeah.
just last week. We had the season, no, not season. We had the series finale
Series.
of
Mm-hmm.
Andor, the big finale to the story of Cassian Andor, the prequel to Rogue One. Brandon, we're not wasting any time. I'm letting you start. Go
Okay.
ahead.
I'm glad that you're letting me start because we talked about this before we started recording. I wanted to start this out with the only complaint that I have about
Yep.
this sequence of episodes.
Yep.
Um, it's something we've touched on before, but I feel like this 3 episode stint really solidifies that this is actually like a genuine complaint that I have about the honestly this season of Andor as a whole, and it was
Yeah.
kind of solidified by these 3 episodes.
I know
And I'm
exactly what you're
curious
about
to
to
see if
say.
you agree with this. Um, I wish that this was not Andor season 2. I
Yep.
wish that this was another TV show. Call it Sparks of the Rebellion, Sparks of Hope, something to do with the rebellion, and have a season, a season focused on Andor. But this 3-episode stint, I loved it. Like, let me get that out of the way before I say mine. I should have said that first. I think that this was the perfect way to end off Andor, or I
Yeah.
should say, what they built this series to be. It was a perfect ending to this series.
Yeah.
I do strongly believe that this should not have been Andor season 1 is an Andor TV series. That
Correct.
Andor season 1 is Andor season 1. It is Andor. Season 2 is, like I said, it is Sparks, call it Sparks of the Rebellion, call it Building of the Rebellion, call it whatever the hell you want. This is not Andor focused. You get, in fact, you have an entire episode, pretty much an episode and a half where Andor isn't even mentioned
Yeah.
in his own titled show.
Yeah. Which again,
That's, in my opinion, it is a perfectly acceptable and honestly enjoyable thing for what they've built this season to be.
yes.
I just wish, and let me expand upon why I have such a problem with this, because I feel like me saying this makes people think like, oh, I didn't enjoy this. Again, I've made that clear. But the reason why I have a problem with this is because if they wouldn't have called this Andor, we would have been able to have more of the other aspects of the rebellion. I feel like we wouldn't have felt, I don't want to say as forced, because I don't want to say the Andor stuff felt forced, but we would have been able to have more about other characters in the rebellion that I really wanted expanded upon. We would have been able to be maybe a full Will arc, and like that stuff was sewn in, but we could have expanded upon that a lot more than we
Sure.
could have and did with calling this Andor, because Andor obviously needs to play a big role. But then again, you have an entire, I think it was like 16 minutes into the second episode of this 3-episode drop is the first time that Andor's like pretty much even mentioned in
Yeah.
this 3-episode drop.
Yeah.
Like,
Um, I look, I don't disagree with you. I don't have necessarily as big of a problem with it as you do. And maybe it's the same. And, because you're the first person to start it, you were talking about it. It made a bigger reaction out of it. I also want to clarify for myself. This complaint is a minute of minute complaints. I understand probably why Disney didn't do it and why Star Wars didn't do it. I do wish they did do that because it can be very misleading.
yeah,
Um,
this has
at
nothing to do with
the
the quality of the show, the quality of the actors, anything like that. The story, none of it, just simply has to do with, I feel like you could have gotten even more out of this if you didn't shoehorn yourself into calling this an Andor season 2.
Well, and I also think the thing that because I thought about that immediately after the show ended, and this was like this is what I kind of came up with. Another Star Wars show did the same thing. It was called The Book of Boba Fett, and it was half Boba Fett, half Mandalorian. And that show
Yeah.
bombed when it was all Boba Fett stuff because the title character was not the title character of his own show to a certain point. Here, it does the same thing, but it's not nearly at all the same level or the same problem
Yeah, they
that
were able to pull off that multiple character mix way better than Book of Boba Fett did, that's for
yes.
sure.
And when you look at the season as a whole, objectively, honest to God, everything those first 3 episodes, I did complain. I thought Andor had the weakest story out of everything, but everything was kind of building, and you knew it was becoming bigger than just Andor himself, but he was still technically at the center focus. The second stint of episodes, it was a lot stronger. Andor had a much better arc, and actually, Mon Mothma had a weaker story.
Yeah.
Then you get last week's episodes, which focused heavily on Andor and was about Andor and Bix, and that whole storyline, and the Gorman massacre, um,
Yeah.
which was definitely an Andor storyline, but obviously focused on the bigger picture, which was the rebellion. And these last 3 episodes, one of them was dedicated entirely to Luthen, and this is why I have such a hard time being mad at it, because the show did set up Luthen, maybe not to have his own whole episode, but it did set up this big moment for Luthen, which was his inevitable death, because he's never heard about ever again. He's never really talked about in the
Well,
rebellion.
and I want to wrap up this conversation because that's actually something I have a really positive about is the way that they handle the end of Luthen's story. So I'm just going to
Yes,
quickly I would have loved to get more out of the building of the rebellion because this is such a pivotal it
sure.
does a masterful job of recontextualizing the original trilogy in a way that I never thought possible. I will never watch the original trilogy the same again after watching specifically Andor season 2, but really
Yeah,
the entire Andor show. It
yeah,
recontextualizes every action, every thought process, every character that happens.
yeah,
I just wish that we would have been able to lean into that even more without feeling like, oh, this is the Andor series. We still have to put Andor in there. Which again, I feel like
right.
me saying that makes it feel like I felt the Andor stuff was weaker, which is true for that first 3 episode drop, where I really feel like that 3 episode drop was the perfect example, even more than this, where you have an entire episode that Andor's not even in, of
Yeah,
Andor felt like a second thought in those first 3 episodes,
sure.
as opposed to now. But anyways, let's get into the way positives because I think this is my favorite 3 episodes was still very much the last 3 episodes, the Gorman
Yes,
Massacre. Pretty much the best thing that Star Wars has ever done. This is my second favorite 3 episode drop out of all of them. I
yeah,
loved these 3 episodes. I thought the way that they ended all of the I think there's one character whose ending was a little bit weaker than the rest, but other than that, I think the ending of all these characters was done masterfully.
yeah.
Especially Luthen, especially Dedra, like all of these characters
Oh,
were just
Dedra.
oh my god, dude. Like
Let's start with her, because Dedra got exactly what she, what was
deserved
coming
and what I expected.
exactly what she deserved. And I guess you could leave it up to interpretation for, after the original trilogy and after the Empire is destroyed. Because obviously we know after the Empire is not fully destroyed, they still have factions, they still have camps, and the Empire still is around just without leadership. Is what
Yeah.
happens to Dedra after, Return of the Jedi?
Oh, she got blown up in some sort of battle or something like that. I would not
Well,
doubt it.
she's a
For
prisoner.
all we know, for all I know, she's on a prison that like got destroyed. Like I don't know, maybe a prison on the Death Star. Well, she's very clearly not on a prison on the Death Star. I think that's actually one of the biggest parts that I loved so much about Dedra's ending is Dedra ends in presumably a very similar, if not the same prison that Andor was locked in
Yes.
season 1. And we
Yes.
know what Andor was doing in season 1, and that was building parts for the Death Star. And it's
Yeah.
such a full circle moment for Dedra's character to go from being such a leader and pushing for the Gorman Massacre and all these things to build, at the time she didn't know, but the Death Star, now to being a slave to the Empire to build this thing that she played a more pivotal role than she even realized in the creation of.
Right. And I honest does does Dedra ever really find out, like, fully, like, what the Death Star is beyond, she knows, like, I think she kind of figures out at the end what the actual plan is and what she's been doing and why
Well,
she's been doing
because
this whole time.
yeah.
But I don't
Well,
think she
because she's
understands the
forced
full
to
scale
say
or
it. She's
scope.
forced to say Death Star. Like that's that whole like conflict
Right.
with
But does
why am
she
I
even
blanking on his
grasp?
name?
Um, uh,
No,
um,
she doesn't. Like to answer your question,
okay.
I don't think she does.
I don't even think she fully grasps, like, what she's actually working towards. And it sparks an interesting conversation of, she has done all this for the Empire, but if she fully understood what she was building, do you think Dedra would have turned? Or do you think she would have tried to do something else about it?
No. I think that Dedra would have still sold her soul to the Cyril had that second guessing of himself and what he was doing, mainly because he felt betrayed by the one he loved being Dedra. I think that's
Yeah.
more of where that second guessing came from. With
Yeah.
Dedra, I think that she would have buttoned herself up and kept pushing forward, no matter what. No matter what she really truly believed to be right or wrong in her heart, that I think is the perfect representation. And the reason why I believe that is because at the end, when she clearly finds out that Cyril was dead, and we see her break down for a brief moment
Yeah.
after the Gorman massacre, but she pulls herself back together. I think that's a perfect representation of her being like, I hate that this just happened, but that's not my job. My job is to pull myself together and to move forward. She would have
Yeah.
done the exact same thing.
Yeah. No, I
And
completely agree with you on that.
and we're jumping around a lot, so I want to jump back to and go episode by episode because
Yeah,
there's
let's do that.
so much that happens. I didn't take a lot of notes for these episodes, to be honest, because honestly, I just sat there and enjoyed these episodes. I really
Yeah.
basked in the fact that this was the last time that we're gonna be seeing a show like this. And hopefully it's not the last time we see a show like this with this level of quality and storytelling, but it's the last time that we might honestly, it's setting in now. This might be the last time we see a lot of these characters with Mon Mothma and with Andor and with Will and with Bail Organa. This is probably the last time we're gonna see Bail Organa on screen, honestly.
Yeah, and
Because we know
I
that
would
Bail Organa dies later on, obviously, when they
yeah,
test out the Death Star.
because he goes back to Alderaan. And that actually kind of makes me I'll be honest, I even texted did I talk to you about I may have talked to you or talked to somebody else about it. But obviously for the show because of Dexter the new Dexter reboot, Dexter Resurrection, Jimmy Schmidt was unavailable due to filming for
Yeah,
that
we
and
talked
wasn't
about
able
this
to
on the
be
podcast
seen.
last episode. Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy Schmidt was not able to be there, and it kind of makes me sad a little bit. Like, I'm not saying anything against the actor who played him here. I've seen him in other stuff. He did a very good job. It just made me sad
Yeah.
when he was not playing. Jimmy Schmidt was not playing Bail Organa because this is
Yeah.
probably the very last chance you'll ever get to see that character.
Yeah,
Um,
this would have been probably his last, unless there's something we don't know about. I would not be shocked if this is the last time we get to see this part of the Star Wars universe. Because from what I've heard, even stuff like the Ryan Gosling Star Wars movie that's coming out, that takes place after the new trilogy. That
yeah, it
doesn't
takes
take
place in
place.
the
That
sequels.
is a looking forward. And if we get a Rey movie like there's been talks about and things like that, everything moving
Sure,
forward, from what I understand, is either going to be other than Mandalorian and Grogu, which takes place in a slightly different portion of the Star Wars universe. All of this is going to be looking way forward, as opposed or stuff like the Acolyte, where we look way back into more Old Republic era things. That's going to be the two ends of Star Wars that we cover. I don't know if we're ever going to get this middle part of Star Wars again that is really the core of what Star Wars is up until this point, not
sure.
including things like legends and things of that nature.
Well, and you talked about specifically earlier on about how like this changes your whole perspective of the original trilogy, especially seeing the birth of the rebellion and whatnot. How about just Rogue One? Like I
Oh,
wish I would
yeah.
have rewatched Rogue One because this like
Yeah,
I
I
don't
know I said I wanted to. I did not get the chance either, unfortunately, but
it's just one of those things like even after the end of this, I'm like that really does kind of change a lot of how I feel about like this and that and honestly all the characters that end up dying in Rogue One. Who's the soldier that escapes with Cassian? Is it I always pronounce his name wrong. Is it Melshi?
yes, Melshi. Yes.
Melshi?
I believe I'm almost positive that's how you pronounce his name. Yeah.
Melshi. Melshi, is a very small character in season 1 and he's a small character here too. But there's a whole lot more weight given to a character who dies very quickly in Rogue One. It's just because we have a lot
Yeah.
of depth here, and it's the same with a lot of these characters, and that's one of my favorite things about the final episode, which we'll get to, is that final shot of Andor just walking.
Yeah.
But going back
Well,
to
because
the episode that we were talking about, it's Luthen's big, goodbye,
It's
big
Luthen
finale
episode.
episode.
Yeah, it is very clearly the farewell to Luthen. And
And
my
yeah,
God, I think one of the best, like, there were a lot of phenomenal scenes in this episode, but the way that it is revealed that, like, you know it's gonna happen, but the way that it's revealed that Luthen killed Lonnie, who had been a
yeah,
staunch supporter of the rebellion and was a spy for years. And
yeah,
he is the spy of the rebellion. He has been feeding, he is Lonnie has played an I think it is actually so I was thinking about this before we started recording. I was actually thinking about this after I finished the 3 episodes the other day. Lonnie is the first person canonically in Star Wars to say the name of the Death Star, if I'm not mistaken.
yes,
Because obviously we've heard about the Death Star at many points in Star Wars, but Andor takes place before Rogue One, which previously was the first canonical time of the people finding out about the Death Star. So finding out that Lonnie is the reason we find out about the existence of the Death Star is, to me, so beautifully done, in the sense of he's always been this standoffish but gung-ho for the rebellion, but scared because
yeah,
he had a wife and kids, man, that he was just trying to protect. And then Luthen just kills him on a park bench because he understands that you have served your purpose. There's no going back. I have no need for you anymore. And that really also builds out Luthen's character in the sense of, oh, you view people as tools to be used. That's how
yeah.
Luthen has always viewed everyone, with
Well, I
maybe
feel
the
like that's
exception
also
of Bix and Andor. But
yeah,
even to that extent, Bix and Andor, he views them as tools. And I think the only person, even Clea, with this whole backstory, Clea was always just a
yeah,
tool. I think
to a
Clea
certain
held a
extent.
lot more care in her heart for Luthen than Luthen even had for her.
Well, and I also feel like, to a certain extent, Luthen also considers himself a tool because it's how he kind of treated
Yeah,
himself the entire second season. Like he knew that his time was coming to an end. And, he did all these horrible things. But I think he also knew that when he started doing the things they did for the rebellion, it was just a means to an end. And he was a pawn in a much bigger game that was being played. And so I think
yeah,
he always kind of considered himself a tool in some regard. Um, and to Clea specifically, I want to talk about that because she's been a very fun character to have throughout the entirety of Andor as Luthen's assistant. But this episode specifically, we get a lot of development for her, and it's really funny that it's at the very end of the show. Uh,
well, and again,
but
that's another
we get
example of, if this wasn't an Andor season, we could have gotten more of Clea, more than just this one episode.
sure. I mean, honestly, I do think we got like the perfect amount for Clea, especially as the character they set her up. Because in season one, she is a part of it, but she's not as much of a part of it as I think she is
Yeah,
here. Especially in season two, she does a lot more. Luthen actually, I feel like, takes more of a back seat as opposed to Clea in this season. Um, and so it's a lot nicer to see her character get developed and see how Luthen and her both developed in the process. Um, she has a very, very unique story. Um, but I also, when Luthen dies, it's kind of a symbolic thing because even in Rogue One, you really see how the rebellion, like when Cassian first shows up and he kills the spy on the planet that they're on in Rogue One, the very like it's the very first scene in the actual present timeline. you know,
yeah.
Rogue One talks about how it's a darker time for the rebellion. It shows you the darker sides. Here really shows you the darker times and how Luthen
Oh,
is
yeah.
that darker time. Luthen was what basically started the rebellion for the most part. And a lot of
He was
Luthen's character
definitely the
is
most pivotal role in the
he was the
rebellion,
most
and I
pivotal
think we'll
role.
get in yeah, we'll get into that more when we talk about the last episode, where you have the
Yeah,
whole conflict of them not believing or caring about Luthen's existence with that Mon Mothma and the council of, that's clearly the buildings of the rebellion, with all the ex-senators that have stepped
right.
out of the Senate and stepped into the light of the rebellion.
But Luthen
But
is the most
talking about
pivotal And but
Yeah.
like Luthen is the most pivotal, but he comes out of darkness, which is why when Luthen dies, it almost feels like that darkness of the rebellion slowly starts to slip away into like a forgotten history that nobody wants to remember. Which
Yeah.
is seen very much so at the we don't care for Luthen. Luthen's done, he's done stuff for this rebellion, but nobody really respects him for what he's done. And when it comes to that like
Yeah.
Senate meeting, when nobody believes. But
Well,
continue.
and yeah, sorry, because I just can't stop thinking about one of the best exchanges that we've gotten in all of Star Wars history, and that being the exchange when Dedra finally finds Luthen. That
Yeah,
exchange
yeah,
and the obviously Luthen knew that it was over for him. He would not have sent Clea away and been the
yeah.
one to stay behind if he didn't know exactly what was happening.
Right.
But that exchange between Dedra, where Dedra's like, "Is anything in this real? Is all of this? Is there anything fake in here?" And Luthen goes, "There's two items in this store that aren't real." And then he goes and he picks up I should say, of questionable origin. It's very specifically worded, and I want to make sure I get that wording correct because it gives the context to why I feel like this exchange is so masterful, both from an acting perspective and at a storytelling perspective. Of it was there's only two items in here of questionable origin. There's this knife, and then Dedra's like, "Well, what's the other one?" And obviously, we know what the other item is of questionable
Yeah,
origin. And
yeah,
then the reveal where at first there's a little bit of like deniability in the sense of maybe Dedra doesn't know it's Luthen. Maybe she does. When she pulls out that comm unit, you could just see the moment the realization hit of no, there's no deniability that Dedra's just here to buy something or pretending or whatever. No, that is, the second she pulls that communication unit out, you know exactly what's going down. And the reveal of Luthen like killing himself, he stabbed himself.
yeah,
Like, obviously, that's not what killed him. We'll talk about that with the next episode. First of all, that was a very bloody knife for Star Wars. That
yeah,
was a Star Wars. That was a very bloody knife.
yeah. It's yeah. I mean, Star Wars has gotten bloody before. Obviously, A New Hope,
True. Yeah.
when Obi-Wan cuts the gangster's arm off
Yeah.
in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Obviously, you get a lot of blood there, but that's like one of the only times it's ever actually shown. Even when Luke gets his hand cut off by Vader in Empire, you don't really
Well, that's the
see it.
benefit of lightsabers, is it's cauterized. And I think that's a really masterfully showing this is a knife. He's just stabbed himself with a regular. That's because, like with blaster bolts, it's the same way. It cauterizes the wound. It's high electricity, like plasma,
Sure,
whatever. It cauterizes it. There is no blood. This isn't
sure,
a blaster. This isn't a lightsaber. This is a regular sharp knife that he
sure.
stabs himself with.
Yeah. Um, and it was bloody for Star Wars. I do agree with you on that. When you talked about the comm unit, that was for that episode. And I want for reference, my folks were sitting in the other room, and my brothers, I think, were upstairs, but their doors were open. The moment she put out the comm unit, because I wasn't even thinking, like, I don't think any of us could have expected that's how she would have discovered Luthen was using that unit. When that came out and I saw exactly what it was, I let an audible, oh, fuck. Just like, oh my God, this thing all the way back from episode 3 of season 1 is the thing that
Yup.
is his undoing. And I don't think anybody could have even thought that, especially because at this point in the timeline, it's years after that point. Nobody
Oh,
ever
yeah.
should have
It's
suspected that.
it's been what? Probably like 4 to 5
Mhm.
years. Probably about 5 years since that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah.
And she's been
It,
hunting
it,
for Axis
jeez.
all this time. And to have the reveal be that comm unit, God, it was so just perfect.
The thing that technically started off Andor's, whole stint with the rebellion. It was over that comm unit. Cassian went to meet, he had this unit. He went to go meet with Luthen to sell it to get money. And that's the whole thing that started off Andor's thing. And it ended up being Luthen's downfall. That's also kind of like the poetic thing about it, and why Andor is still at the center focus of this story. Andor's, big, like, hey, I have this thing. You want to buy it? Oh, the rebellion's kind of cool. I'll join it. Ended up being, Luthen's piece that caused his, inevitable downfall. It's very poetic in a sense. And everything backstory wise between Luthen and I always felt like he saw his assistant as like a daughter figure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, I definitely think she saw him as a father figure. That's for sure.
I can't not sit there and go, okay, Luthen definitely in some way had to have cared for Clea, like in some way,
More than
there
others, for sure.
at least more than others. There had to have been some regard, because I don't think he also would have, like, if she was a tool similar to everybody else he's used in this universe to start the rebellion, he would have sent her instead of himself, and he would have gotten away. He would have done it. So I do feel like there's some regard that, he does have a care and a level. You're not just a tool, even though I've used you at a lot of times to be a tool,
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I think
yeah,
I want to move on to the other episodes because we have a lot to talk about. But I do love the whole scene with the Clea and Luthen on Naboo.
yeah,
And
that
that
was
whole
really good.
scene of them sitting at the table with the bomb and blowing up. I thought they were going to blow up the full bridge, but blowing up the troop transports, and
Yeah,
that kind of being the like, there's no going back from this. That was the point in which of no return. We just blew up.
yeah,
Like, up until that point, it was very, like, minimal rebellion, and one thing I know I said one last thing, but, like, I'm really curious to see. I wish we knew what battle and what context we see Luthen and Clea on originally. I don't think we don't know what planet that is, we don't know what battle that is. I really wanna know what that was. I don't know if there's, like, research online or stuff, like, there's any confirmation, but I'm curious. But I just think with that whole arc of seeing them become closer, but also Clea learning how to be what
yeah,
Luthen needs her to be. And that whole scene of, am I your daughter now? You're whatever I need you to be. And that scene was just like
yeah.
okay, he cares about her, but ultimately she is still just a tool.
Right, right.
And that's just like that building into episode 11, switching over to the next episode
Yes.
of her having to make the hardest decision that she'll ever probably the hardest thing she'll ever have to do in her entire life, of killing her father. Basically, she basically had to kill her father in
Well,
order to
it's
make sure that what
yeah,
he did wasn't for nothing.
right. Well, it does kind of all blend together. That actually happened at the end of the last episode. Luthen dies at the end of last episode, and then it's the fallout of that is what happens over the next 2 episodes, which
Oh,
is
really? I thought that it was, oh man, I forgot how dense that episode was then.
it
No,
all
you're
kind of blends
right,
together because it
because
fades
no,
to black on him.
yes, you are right, because episode 11 is when you have the rescue mission of Clea. That's episode 11.
Yeah, episode 11 is, we're catching up with K2SO and Andor and Melshi, and
Yep,
we're, following Clea escaping the hospital, and going to the complex that Andor and Bix actually stayed in when Bix was, needing to hide out, trying to
yep,
escape and anything after her attempted sexual assault in the first 3 episodes. Um,
yeah.
and it's she digs into the walls, this, that, and she finally pieces together the comm unit that freaking Will, man, turn the comm unit on. You could have gotten her hours prior. And she uses it
Well,
to, no, I
yeah.
get it. I'm just like, in that moment, I was like, oh my god, you got to be kidding me. Answer the unit. Um, and she sends code to the rebellion on Yavin, which then gets Cassian involved with Melshi and K2SO, to go and get who they think is actually Luthen. They don't know that Luthen's dead. But they using context clues, can assume that it's Luthen, especially with where it is and who it is.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily like. I think of all the episodes in this like 3 episode stint, that one is honestly my weakest one. Not because it does anything wrong. It just is a major setup episode for the final, and it's also the fallout episode of what happened prior. So it's that weird mix in between where it's like, okay, we're dealing with fallout here, and now we're setting up for the big finale, which is the
Yeah. I
inevitable.
think
It's preparing for all of it.
Well, because this episode is also where you have a lot of the Dedra being under investigation. You have
Yes.
a masterful scene with director Krennic in Dedra's interactions. And
Fantastic.
when Krennic was making Dedra, that's when we have the scene of Krennic grabbing Dedra's face and making her say Death Star, and that whole like reveal and sequence was like
Yeah.
phenomenal. I love Krennic. I think Krennic is one of those characters that was obviously he was the main villain in Rogue One. That was like the big bad
Right.
that followed them throughout Rogue One, and he played a minor role in this like Andor series as a whole. And I think
Sure.
that does a lot to set up his character and where we see him in Rogue One, and how his character his character regression, honestly, because here he's very high and mighty. He's very like, I am the top of the food chain right now. But when we
Yeah.
see him in Rogue One, he's very much not the top of the food chain. Again, he is kind of the
Yeah.
main villain, but he's very clearly reporting to the Emperor and Darth Vader and things of that nature.
He tries to
Or
be
more
the
specifically,
Tarkin.
Grand Moff Tarkin,
Yeah,
who
he
gets
tries
name
to.
dropped,
Yeah,
but
yeah. We really get to see like he tries to he's like a pretender to Grand Moff Tarkin, and here we really get to see like what happens when he's in charge and he is the Tarkin. And then in Rogue One, you really see the effect
the
of, okay,
reality
no,
of the situation.
he's not actually a Tarkin. He takes orders from everybody else, and it's almost in like it's funny because it's almost in like a I'm trying to think of the best way to say it, but it's almost like he's just Tarkin's little bitch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, is there any easier way to say that? I don't know, but it like he's almost like Tarkin's little bitch the entire time in Rogue One, and it's funny when you see him here because of the fact that he's Mr. Boss Man, he's big, he's scary, and then you get to this scene with Dedra. But yeah, no, that whole interaction was incredible. It actually might be my favorite scene with Krennic. I think that just period in Star Wars, and I love a lot of what Krennic did in Rogue One, but I think specifically here, in this scene, he gets a lot to shine.
Yeah.
And you also know that Ben Mendelsohn is he's eating up every second of that screen time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah,
You know he
absolutely.
is.
Absolutely. And I think, like, again, this episode was definitely, I don't want to call it the weakest episode, like, as in it was a bad episode, but it was
Yeah.
definitely like, there were a lot of phenomenal moments in it. Like, I think another moment that I really enjoyed was just seeing. I'm trying to remember his name, and I have my note. I have my like character sheet pulled up, but I don't have his name on here because he played such a small role ultimately. But a big part of this was the hunt for for Clea, and
Yeah.
we get the whole thing of Lonnie's friend,
Yeah.
who's taken over the role of leading Axis, and you also the extent in which the Empire is willing to go, spreading the false rumor of this deadly
Sure.
virus and things of that nature.
Sure. Right.
His death might be my favorite death in maybe all of Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
He died so serendipitously. He died like the little bitch that he is. He died like a ragdoll as a human shield for K2SO. He died
Yeah.
like he meant nothing because
Yep.
ultimately he meant nothing.
Nothing.
And that's why I don't remember his name. I wish I did because the actor did a phenomenal job in he played a pretty big role in some of these episodes. especially this one specifically, but watching the way that he dies as a human shield for K2SO, and seeing the ragdoll of a body, and seeing him,
Yeah.
you actually see the impact of the blaster bolts that are being shot at him.
Yeah.
I just thought that was just phenomenal sequence. I mean,
Yeah.
K2SO in that entire sequence was also phenomenal, with him being the one that prevents any further communication and taking out so many of the empire and things of that nature. But that's really the only one I wanted to focus on, because we also have another episode to talk about that I want to talk about more. Was just
Yeah.
that death was just so perfect, in my opinion.
Well, and as we transition to the final episode, because really, K2SO really was only in, I guess, if you really want to clarify, it was really only in 2 episodes of this show, which is funny considering when the show was announced, it was announced as a K2SO Andor adventure series. That's what it was pitched as. I'm glad it wasn't, because this show is so much better than a K2SO Andor, adventure series. But I do wish we just got a little bit more bonding between Andor and K2SO. Like we got a good amount, and I think we saw enough of it to like
Yeah.
see their relationship like blossom and grow the way it did. But also, when you objectively look at it, because we only see him in the final 3 stint of episodes, you only get the opportunity to see what is maybe a day and a half to 2 days before the events of Rogue One actually starts. So you only really get
Yeah.
a bit, like a few seconds before they're actually like,
Well,
bonding.
and
And I guess
also,
I
well,
don't
it's just
like
because,
need to see it,
yeah.
but
Well, because
it's
they had a
I want.
full year. They had a full year in between the end of the last episode and here, where they very clearly have bonded a lot more.
Yeah,
With that poker scene and things like that. Like, I think he said he lost, like they've played like over 200 matches, and very clearly they've grown close. But you are right, where it would have been nice to see a little bit more of them, because with the end of Andor being pretty much exactly where we see the start of Rogue One, you know that this is where this is where the K2SO story, and obviously with K2's death in Rogue One,
right.
it still means more, but it would have been nice to see even more of K2SO to make it mean even more, if that makes
And like, yeah,
sense.
and again, like it's I don't even want to really call it a complaint, because I thought what they did with him was fine. It's just I do think that they had the opportunity to do more if they wanted. And if it really came down to the thing of we don't really know how to do more with him beyond having like a whole nother set of episodes that just is like here's the thing. You could have done more, but then you would have had to have had a whole nother set of episodes that only dealt with K2SO, which I don't think you would have needed. And it would have
Yeah,
derailed it, especially considering that the show is at this point about Andor. Like I said, as it was originally pitched as a K2SO Andor show, it quickly changed from that to being strictly Andor. So you don't necessarily need that. Um,
yeah,
it's something that I would have liked to have seen. Also because they got rid of the original canon for the bonding between K2SO and Andor, with K2SO being uh one of the droids that was at the Gorman massacre. You know what I mean?
yeah. Yeah. Well, in transitioning over to the last episode, I took 3 notes. I took 3 simple notes. This is how locked in I was. Again, that realization hitting of, man, this is the end of an era right now. The 3
Yeah.
notes that I took was, well, Bail made it to Yavin, because we get the reveal that Bail Organa is on Yavin.
Right.
I wrote down pop off Andor, because that was when I was watching the scene of Andor addressing the like pseudo rebellion Senate with those ex senators, Bail Organa, Mon
Right.
Mothma, people like that. And Andor was tearing. My God, I want to talk more about that scene. But the only other note that I took, and I honestly do not remember what context I wrote it in, I literally just wrote the word "damn." That's that.
Yeah.
I just wrote the word "damn," and I feel like
Yeah.
that just like honestly, that could be said about everything that happened in this entire episode. Because flashing back to that scene where they don't want to believe that this weapon is real. They
Right.
don't want
It's a
to believe
yeah.
that the Empire is building a weapon that is so ultimately, and here's the thing, it's not even that they don't want to believe that they're building a weapon so terrifying. They just have so little information to go off of. They even ask, like, what type of weapon? What, like, we have no answers to any of this. We just know a name of an engineer, a name of a weapon, and that it exists. And that it includes
Yeah,
kyber crystals, the energy stuff from Gorman, and a few other things that have been building towards, like the stuff that they
sure.
were making in the prison.
Yeah. Um, this whole last episode, I didn't even write notes for this last episode because I was just so engaged in it. Which may be
Yeah.
a problem if I forget to talk about things and whatnot. But I think that
Yeah.
this episode encapsulated everything. It also encapsulated everything just for like Andor's character specifically. Because again, at the very end of season 1, we see him, I actively want to fight this fight. I want to join the rebellion. And we get to see him here as Captain Andor, the rebellion captain who we know is Rogue One, but it's also like a full circle thing for him in a certain sense, because originally he didn't want anything to do with this, and now he has the utmost faith in the rebellion. It's like such a full circle thing for his character. And when he's debating with the senators, um we get to see his leadership come through. We get to see like why he is an important character in Rogue One. Now we
We
see
see
why.
why he is Captain Andor.
Yes. Why he is the important person that he is in this, early stage of the rebellion. And it kind of makes me say, again, he's not a character in the original trilogy. He never was going to be. You never could find a way to fit him in, especially now. But it makes me sad because I really would have liked to have seen what would have happened to Cassian had he survived and had he gone on to continue.
I'm glad he didn't, because I think it is such a this makes me happy that Andor died even more than when I watched
Yeah.
Rogue One, which I know is a terrible thing to say because I don't want Andor to die, but I feel like it just makes his death so much better. Like,
Yeah.
that's why I'm probably gonna watch Rogue One again tonight, because I didn't get the opportunity to do that before filming.
Yeah.
Because knowing everything we know about this struggle and journey, and one thing I don't want to talk about now because I want to save that to be the last thing we talk about, but with Bix and seeing
Yeah.
Bix at the end of this episode, and what that means and
Which
things of
I
that nature.
I
Um,
called we'd see her again, which is funny enough.
yes,
Uh
yeah, which isn't shocking, but I do want to go back to like, I think that they did such a masterful job of explaining to us without spelling it out why Luthen is never mentioned again after Andor. I think they do
yeah.
such an amazing job of setting up that. Again, it all goes back to, and I know this is probably the only thing we're really going to focus on because it was the big thing for this episode, was that meeting at the Senate, or with
Yeah.
the senators and the leaders of the rebellion, because they don't trust him. They don't care about Luthen at all. He is the dirty
Right.
laundry that we want to forget about. We don't want to associate with him. And that plays
Sure.
into where we see Clea. And obviously, I think it's insinuated that Clea is leaving Yavin. Like, she wants to leave Yavin. I don't like, she's another character that we never see again. And that's because she understands that she has played the role that she needed to play in the rebellion. And now it's time for others to take the reins. That's another reason why Luthen felt comfortable killing himself, is because he
Yeah.
understood that his role in the rebellion and in building the foundation, that whether they appreciate the fact that it was him that built it or not, his role was over. And that was Andor's point, is
Yeah.
he had one of the best lines in all of Star Wars. I know I've said that a lot with this series, but it's really just true, where Andor is screaming and says, "None of you have even given a fraction of what Luthen gave to this rebellion. Like,
Yeah.
don't you dare talk about him that way. Like, don't you dare talk about sacrifice and what you've given up when there's this man who, yes, we all agree was not always the best human being, but don't you watching Andor stand up for Luthen was I'm a tear. I love that scene so much.
It was phenomenal, especially because if you like reverse the roles, Luthen never would have stood up for Cassian. He just wouldn't
Yeah.
have, because that's who he is.
And I think Cassian knows that. I think Andor knows that, even though, and it goes back to the scene with Vel in Clea. where it was Vel, right? It was Vel that was the one with Clea and trying to basically calm Clea's nerves in the sense of like, I also like didn't really like Luthen all that much, but I can understand the struggle you're going with. And
Sure.
Mon going to Vel and being like, hey, I want to believe this story of the Death Star. Make me believe it. I trust you to make me believe. If
Yeah.
you tell me that you believe that this is true, then it is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which clearly it worked.
It clearly worked, and then it kicks off the, you know, events building into Rogue One, and it leads to probably my favorite shot in this entire series, favorite moment in this entire series, which is, you know, obviously at the beginning of the show, before the show, you knew where the story was going. You know where it ends up. But then you get this incredible final shot of Andor walking slowly, and the music swells. The Andor theme is playing as you walk past all these people, who most of them are eventually going to be walking into a battlefield where they die as Rogue One. But my favorite shot, and this actually kind of got me to tear up a little bit. I didn't full on bawl, but I teared up, be just like tears of happiness and joy, was when Andor looks at the Force user and she stares at him, and he just gives a subtle nod back because she
Yeah.
knows. Obviously, she already mentioned there's a destiny with Andor, and I think he knows now. Like, I'm dying for this rebellion. He may not even know how, but he knows like I'm in it,
Yeah.
and he knows that it's gonna. And she, as a Force user, knows like it's gonna lead to his eventual sacrifice. It is
Yeah.
my
Well,
favorite
in
shot. It's
yeah, no,
it's
I
a
agree.
beautiful moment. So
Yeah. Well, and to wrap this conversation up with Andor, because I know we can talk Andor for hours, and we really have.
yeah,
Um, Finding out that Bix was pregnant with Andor's kid, I heard that there were some people that had problems with that. Of like, oh, Bix was like just chopped up to be, oh, she was pregnant, and that's why she like. I don't think Bix left because she was pregnant. I don't think that's the story that they were trying to insinuate at all.
no,
I think the Bix leaving for the reasons that she gave still holds completely true. I'm curious to see is Andor's kid anyone that we know? I heard on a podcast someone said, "Is it Poe Dameron?" That was the
it's
big
not
one.
Poe Dameron. My God,
It's
I heard
not.
that too.
It's not. Yeah, I don't think it is. I'm curious to see if I personally, I hope it's not. I know that sounds weird. I hope that this is just a kid that gets to live a happy, healthy life, because it
Yes.
would mean so much more for Andor's sacrifice if this kid gets to live a happy, peaceful life on this farming planet and never has to worry about war. Never has to, because of his father's sacrifices, he never has to worry about any of these things.
Well, and I'll wrap up my final thoughts here. Rebellions are built on hope, and for Cassian, it's the hope that the rebellion succeeds and that people get to live free lives. And in his sacrifice, it's for lives that he'll never get to know. And the irony of that is that he has a life that, you know, he created that he never gets to know. He doesn't know that he has a son, but he fought for the reason that his son could live, which is for the freedom of the galaxy and the end of the oppression of the empire. And it's such a beautiful note to end on. And it's almost like in Bix's final shot with her looking out isn't one of sadness, it's one of content, because she knows that she made the right choice to let Cassian do what he did. And I think it's probably fair. She probably knows. I would think it's probably
Yeah,
hard for her like not to know, or somebody to have not told her, so that her kid can know, hey, this is what your dad stood for. This is what he fought for.
yeah.
Um,
And honestly, like it really feels like, and I know that like we're getting Ahsoka, we're getting Mandalorian and Grogu. That all takes place around this period of time in the rebellion, technically. A little bit earlier, I think, than the events of Andor, if I'm not mistaken, just based on
sure,
like when things takes place. But
sure.
I do still think that this really marks an end of an era for Star
Yeah,
Wars. I think
it
that
does.
it really wraps up because like Ahsoka and like I think the only thing left for this era is like no, I think this is like really is like the end of this era of Star Wars.
It
It
technically
really
is.
feels like it.
Do you
Um,
classify Mandalorian and Grogu as that area of Star Wars as well, or no?
I mean, I do, but like we already know that like the big like villain of the Mandalorian and Grogu and Ahsoka, or especially the Ahsoka is Thrawn. But
Yeah,
Thrawn is like never mentioned throughout like all of the rebellion of Star Wars, all of the movies and things like that. And
yeah,
I think that that's because while it takes place in the same relative time period, it is a very separate and sectioned off portion of Star
yeah,
Wars
yeah. No,
that
it's
this feels very much like again it directly all of this leads up to A New Hope in such a very direct. I mean, we have a moment by moment play basically until A New Hope, and it feels like that we have ended this period of Star Wars in a
yeah,
very big way.
yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
I agree with you.
I don't know, like wrapping up the thoughts, like Andor season 2, it's the best thing that Star Wars has done up until this point. It really
Perfect.
is.
It
Like,
is perfect.
I think that the first 3 episodes, I wouldn't call it perfect just because of those first 3 episodes, I think were a little weaker, but I think after
Sure.
those first 3 episodes, it truly is I think it has the best moments in Star Wars. I think the acting is phenomenal. I don't know. Like, I don't wanna keep rambling on, but I just don't wanna stop, like, it feels weird ending off this era of Star Wars. But we do need to move on because we have
Yeah. Let's
our
let's
main
let's move
topic of
on.
conversation.
Look, Star Wars
Um,
pulled off the impossible by making Andor season 2 almost out of perfection. Speaking of impossible, there was a certain Mission Impossible. That transition was horrible. I shouldn't have even. I see your
I hate
face.
you so
That was
much.
horrible.
Anyways, we are ranking the Mission Impossible movies. Again, we mentioned at the top, I have watched all of the Mission Impossible movies recently. I rewatched, well, technically not a rewatch. Most of these were for the first time.
Yeah.
So we're gonna rank them, and we're gonna talk about why we're ranking them as we go. These aren't going to be full reviews of each movie. We're not gonna talk
No.
probably we're definitely not going to even talk as long as we talked about like how we talk about Last of Us and Andor for each of these movies because there's 7 of them and we'd be here for 7 hours.
Yeah.
Um so we're
Yeah.
going to give our brief thoughts on why we're putting it where it is. We'll give a little bit of like insight into our enjoyment and things of that nature. But again, this is not our full review of each movie. So don't go into this thinking that it is. The title of the episode is going to be something about ranking. I'm not even going to mention reviews in the title because I don't want people to think that
Sure.
this is. But I think that's enough prefacing to say, let me switch the stage. I have each movie
Oh
up here
boy.
in order. I also have a little bit of information on each movie. So we're going to start with Mission Impossible 1. It was released in 1996. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 50 minutes, which is the shortest Mission Impossible movie.
Yeah.
It was directed by Brian De Palma, which he only directed one. He only directed Mission Impossible 1. In fact, the first 3 movies, actually the first 4 movies were all directed by one-off directors. It was only once you hit Rogue Nation, I believe, when you
Yeah.
hit a the consistent director throughout those movies.
Yeah.
But jumping into Mission Impossible 1, Carson, do we want to start out with giving a ranking and then explain why we're giving it that ranking? I think that would be a good way to do this.
Yeah, we can do that.
So
So from
personally for
yeah,
me,
go for it.
no, you go ahead. You go ahead. I've been
Well,
talking a lot.
you
So
see, it's hard because, like, for me with Mission Impossible 1, I think it's the best of the original 3. I also think that it's the 90s, based off the television show from the 60s. It's very 90s. It's a very product movie of its time. It's not bad. It's got
oh
great
yeah.
stunt work, and the story itself, look, it's a more watered down, crazier version of The Fugitive, which is a movie that starred Harrison Ford and Tommy Lee Jones. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but it's
I
Ethan Hunt's basically trying to prove his innocence the entire time. It's Mission Impossible because everybody believes that he did it. And so it's just one of those things of like, I think as a movie from the 90s, a generic action movie from the 90s, it's perfectly fine. But when you look at some of these later movies, especially like Ghost Protocol on, they've definitely gotten better and they've done a better job with the film. So I think that being said, I don't think it's bad. I don't think that there's anything about it that I'm like, okay, this is like horrible. I also will preface this. I don't think any of these movies are like, I'm glad it's not on here. I don't think any of them are like failures. I don't think they're all that bad.
yeah,
That
yeah.
being said, I would put the first Mission Impossible in B because
That
I
is
think that,
exactly what I was thinking. I honestly am right there with you, with it being a
yeah,
B. So, the main villain of this, played by John Voight,
yeah,
Jim, I
phenomenal actor.
phenomenal actor, did a good job in this movie, but honestly, it didn't really hit with me. I think this movie is a good setup for what all of these movies are, which is just really cool set pieces. It has one of the most iconic scenes in honestly movie history of him breaking into Quantico, like being lowered down by Krieger, who eventually turns out also betrayed him.
Yeah,
Um
yeah,
and I feel
yeah,
like those scenes are by far the best. I think and this is something that I could not stop thinking about, that I think these first 3 movies, this is the one thing, I shouldn't say the one thing, but this is something that these 3 movies, of the original trilogy, because I think of it like that as an original trilogy, do better than the latter movies, and that is their masterful use of silence. That scene where he's
yeah,
being lowered down is so eerily quiet because they have to stay quiet. Later on, you get to these gigantic, very loud and bombastic set pieces, but in these first 3
yeah,
movies, it's a lot, especially this movie, it's a lot more scaled down and a lot more personal, and they utilize silence in those scenes to a masterful degree to build up suspense. You don't need music to build suspense like a lot of movies do nowadays. You just need
yeah,
silence. And I think that's
yeah,
something that this movie really showcased, how they can use silence and how they do use silence throughout these 3 movies. Um, it's also the introduction to this world, the introduction to my favorite character in all of Mission Impossible, being Luther. I think Luther is the best character in all of the Mission Impossible. Starting out straight from the
yeah,
first movie, I think he is the goat of all goats in Mission Impossible. But yeah, I think ultimately the emotional beats don't hit. I really don't think there are any. I think they try with
not really.
Claire a little bit,
Yeah, yeah,
who's played
just a little
by,
bit.
Emmanuel, Burt. I butchered that name, I know.
Yes, you did.
But I think yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
But I think that no one did a bad job acting, but no one really
no,
made me feel any emotion, really. I didn't really like this movie starts off with the death of I don't even remember their names because they died so quickly. That's kind of how you kick off this entire movie, is a failed heist. And again, you talked about it, it's proving Ethan Hunt's innocence, that he isn't the mole that leaked the information that led to his entire team's death. Turns out it was Jim. But I feel like
sure.
the fact that we really it's mentioned that Jim is who made Ethan who he is and started Ethan on this path.
Yeah,
We don't see that.
yeah,
We don't like we didn't get any of that. I don't care about it. It's mentioned like once and never again pretty much, and it just feels like you had something really cool there, but you didn't expand upon it, so I don't really feel like it hits. I don't really feel like I care about it at all. Um so like
sure.
overall, again, I think it is a enjoyable movie, but I think it is honestly, I feel like it's
Yeah,
the perfect movie to set off. It is a perfect middle ground to be like, it's every other movie is either better or worse than this. And spoiler alert, I think there's only one movie that's worse than this movie. Um,
Okay.
But
I think that this is the most 90s generic 90s action movie. It like if you put it in a line with like some of the other like 90s action movies like Face Off or even The Matrix, like to a certain extent. Like I enjoyed The Matrix, but even to a certain extent, like it just slides in there as like it's 90s, it's generic, but it's a fun time to watch. Um but it's nowhere near on the same level as something like I love Die Hard. I think it's probably one of the best examples. It might even be the best action movie. Period. That's not a 90s. It's 88 for Die Hard.
yeah,
But that's like the standard you try to hit whenever you're looking at some of these like old classic or older classic 90s action films. And so I feel confident putting it a B. I think it's fun. I think it's worth a watch. If you're watching all the Mission Impossible movies, it's worth a watch once. Maybe rewatch it again if you're curious.
yeah.
Um, I don't have a lot to say about this next one though.
I'm just gonna go ahead and put this right here. It is Mission Impossible 2. If you're an audio listener, I put it in C tier. I think it is the weakest of the Mission Impossible movies. This was directed by John Woo. It was released in 2000, so 4 years after the first Mission Impossible movie. It is a little bit longer, running about 2 hours and 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And I just did
Um,
not this was the
no.
only movie that I watched out of all of the Mission Impossible movies that I felt like I had to get through, as opposed to the other ones where I wasn't even that high on 3, to be totally honest with you, but I still didn't feel like I was slogging through it as much as I felt like I was honestly kind of slogging through 2. I feel like one of the best
Sure.
examples of why that is it's actually really funny because I actually predicted something that happened in this movie. And again, I'd never even seen these first 2 movies before. But after watching the first movie, it's very obvious that this play has a very heavy influence from the James Bond series. That's a very heavy
Yeah.
influence on these series. But one thing that isn't present in the first movie that I was very, very appreciative of is the James Bond movies have the Bond girls. They have the girl that follows James Bond for a singular movie and gets written off, dies, moves on, whatever you might have it. First movie does not have that. You don't have a Bond girl. This movie has a Bond girl. And I really didn't feel like it was necessary.
Yeah.
I don't enjoy the inclusion, honestly, of Naya. I think her actress, who is again, I'm gonna probably butcher this name, but it is Thodry Newton. I don't know if you know how to say her name better. Thondwi Newton plays Naya, and I just feel like her actress did a really good job, but again, it feels just like a Bond girl. It feels like a girl that's used for her being a woman and moving the plot forward to seduce the main villain, and that's it.
Yeah. I think that I hate the idea that she injects herself with the virus that they're trying to basically spread, or this disease that they're basically trying to spread, because I ultimately feel
Yeah.
like first off, it was way too short. They like if they were gonna do that, that should have been like something they did about halfway through, as opposed to like the last few minutes of the
Yeah,
movie.
build up the suspense of it a lot more. Yeah.
They also need to build her character up more. So and again, this is something that I like about the later movies is that it feels more interconnected. And here it really, other than Luther and Ethan, there's nothing really returning from that first movie that I
Yeah.
care
I mean, even
about.
the director of the IMF and things like
Yeah,
everyone is different other than Luther and Ethan, who arguably for all of the movies are the only through line for the most part, with the exception of a few actors in the later
correct.
movies. Like at one of my other favorite characters other than Luther, Benji, who appears for the first time in a very short scene in the third movie, being the only other continuing through line for the later movies.
I I actually like you can move it or you can keep it there. I don't really care. I actually think it Mission Impossible 2 goes in D. Similar to kind of what you said. I don't even like you had to get through it. I sometimes don't even think this movie's actually watchable at times. Like even the dialogue, I feel like a lot of times is just bad. Like it's straight up bad. And a lot of this movie, I feel like they are trying to copy off of the success that was The Matrix. Um, and so I don't even consider this to be a
I mean,
C. I don't even think it's good enough for a C. I think it like is a solid D movie. that you only watch if you're rewatching the Mission Impossible movies?
Honestly, I'm realizing how much I forgot about this movie and what happens in it. Like, I have my notes pulled up here as well, and I'm scrolling through. And the fact that I like barely remember a lot of what happened, like I honestly forgot about like the main villain and what his motivation. Like I don't remember any of that. So I'm
No,
comfortable moving
no.
it from C to D tier because like I think this is the only like not enjoyable Mission Impossible movie personally because I feel
Sure.
like I just didn't care about any of the stakes didn't feel as high as they needed to. Again, if they were gonna inject Kai or Naya with the virus, they should have done that way earlier because literally she
Sure.
injects herself and then it feels like we literally do not see her again until she is cured. There's no
Sure.
tension, there's no nothing. We don't even really flash back to like him looking at the watch, right? Like it's just like a she got injected, oh, and she's saved. Like that's it. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I'm comfortable putting it in D if you are. We can just leave that there. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah.
honestly, just leave it. Just get. I don't even want to look at it. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Mission Impossible 3.
So, yes,
We're
Mission
gonna differ
Impossible
on this.
3 released in 2006, came out 6 years after. It runs for 2 hours and 6 minutes, so only 3 minutes longer than the first mission or the second Mission Impossible movie. Directed by J.J. Abrams,
Yeah.
better known for other works like Star Wars and things like that. But he is the director of Mission Impossible 3. And I'm gonna let you give your thoughts on where they should be ranked because I have my thoughts on where they should be ranked. But I want to hear your thoughts first.
So I do like this movie. I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's perfectly fun to watch. That being said, and we'll probably differ on this. In my heart, I believe it probably belongs in C, where it's more
Ooh.
forgettable. I think it's more forgettable. I don't necessarily like the villain at all. I also like the only thing I really appreciate about this movie, again, obviously Luther, we love Luther. But I really only appreciate Michelle Monaghan in this movie because I think of all the Bond girls for Ethan Hunt, she is really good here, and I think she has a really nice presence to this film.
Yeah.
So I am willing to settle for B, but I don't think it goes like I'm also willing to like
I was so
if you like it more, I'm willing to put it uh at B above the first Mission Impossible, but I don't personally think it's better than the Mission Impossible movie at all.
I was gonna put it at the bottom of B tier because I don't personally think unless we want to do it to where there's like one Mission Impossible movie per category, like which we don't even there's too many categories to even do that. I personally think that I would put this slightly less enjoyable, but I still feel like it fits that category of being a B tier Mission Impossible movie.
It's perfectly fine.
But
That's how I look
less
at it.
than I honestly I disagree with you. With the introduction of Julia, Michelle Monaghan's character, I I actually really didn't like the fact that they introduced him being married because I knew for a fact that it wasn't going to stick. There was no way that this was going to continue, and it kind of does. I mean, she's seen at the end of the fourth movie,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
but she's really never like I think she was one of my least favorite parts of the movie, not because I think she did a bad job of acting, and obviously she's what drives a lot of the plot forward with Owen, played by Philip Hoffman, being the main
Oh
villain
yeah.
of these episodes, who did a phenomenal job, I think.
I've read about that. That's right.
But
Yeah.
I think that her involvement just to be written off and basically never seen again kind of detracted from my enjoyment of it. Just knowing, like, oh, she's just going to be here for this one movie. She's built up to be this big character that means so much to Ethan, and then she's gone. Like, I did not love that that's what happened, personally speaking.
Um, no, I guess that's I'm so indifferent about it because like I do think she's something that held the movie, like lifted it up a little bit just because I love her as an actress. But I also like, okay, if somebody says that, I'm not gonna like, oh, you're so wrong. It's not like it's an Academy Award winning performance here. I just thought it was a
Yeah.
lovely thing to add. That being said, I completely forgot to talk about that. Philip Seymour Hoffman is the best of for the original trilogy of the film, is the best of the three. And honestly, I don't know if
Oh,
that's
he's the best
because
villain for sure out of the
I
3.
don't know.
That's not a
I don't.
controversial take. Out of the original 3, not controversial.
Oh, and I don't know. Like, I love John Boy. I think he's a wonderful actor. But like something about Hoffman, and I don't know if this is just the way he was written or if it was the villain that he was. It very well could have. It couldn't have been either, maybe. But I know I am very biased with Philip Seymour Hoffman because I think he's very talented, and I think you could give him the worst role ever, and he will still find a way to make it the best thing ever. So he also was an element that lifted this film up, just as a
Yeah.
villain perspective. Again, I because I don't want to say too much about it or stay on it because I really want to get to these last four because this is really where we're going to hit a stride.
Yeah.
I do think that this film is like it's good. It's perfectly watchable. It's the same as the first one where it's if you're watching all of them, watch it, or if you just want to rewatch it because I'm sure it's perfectly fine. It's just not the best. It's almost like I actually kind of look at this franchise horrible comparison because one franchise is worse compared to this, but the Fast and the Furious franchise, it took a while for them to get their stride. Some of those movies are
Yeah.
god awful. Even some of the later ones are god awful. But after a certain point they figured out, okay, we just need to have fun with this and we need to stop taking it so seriously. And this film
Yeah.
was like the first one where I was like, okay, it still is taking itself seriously, but it is also starting to have fun with itself.
Well,
It
because
is
this
it
movie has the highest stakes out of the original 3 movies, and I
yes.
feel like you actually feel the stakes. Like, technically, the virus and things like that in the previous movies, it was still a world-ending threat, but it never felt world-ending. You never really cared.
Sure. Well, and again, the first
Um,
movie was more about, Ethan clearing his name than anything. I mean, that's more of a personal stake to Ethan, so much the world. I mean, yeah, it had like certain things, but that's mostly what that was about. The second one was more about the world, like saving the world virus. This one here is very different. Um,
yeah.
and so I don't know. I look, I do appreciate this movie. I think it's good. I think it's fun enough. But I don't know if I like it more than that first movie. It might even be on like that's why it's in B for me. I might have put it in C, but it's about the same for me. Really, I could go back
Yeah.
and forth just like tossing it.
Yeah, honestly,
Um,
that's why I put it at the bottom of B tier because I feel like ultimately these movies are kind of like you said, like they're kind of interchangeable for me, but I feel like it's slightly I don't know, maybe I don't know. I'm gonna leave it in B tier. But overall it was an enjoyable watch. But like you said, I think these last 4 movies is really when Mission Impossible started to hit its stride.
well, it's because of
So
the
next
interconnected
we
so
yeah. So next we have Mission Impossible 4, directed by Brad Bird. This is the
yeah,
last movie that is not directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who directs the last 4 Mission Impossible movies, being
yeah,
the ending of this, probably the ending of Mission Impossible.
it is. They've
Um,
already stated it's the ending of
um,
Mission.
yeah. So this movie came out in 2011. So again, about 5 years. They've all come out about 4 to 5 years after each other.
Yeah,
This movie is the longest yet. Not the longest Mission Impossible movie by far, but the longest
right,
yet,
but
being at
it's
2
the
hours
longest
and
one. Yeah,
13 minutes.
sure.
Yeah.
Um,
And I am gonna start this one off, and I'm gonna put this in A tier. I
yep, I
don't think
agree with
it
you on that.
personally, there is one movie that sits above this one for me personally, um, which we'll get to that. But I think overall, this is the first time in watching these Mission Impossible movies that I like locked in and I was laughing out loud. I was having so much fun
Yeah.
watching Ghost Protocol.
Well, and I
I
think
enjoyed
yeah,
the experience of watching this movie a lot more obviously than the first 3, and I feel like that's just going to be a staple of what happens with the rest of this ranking. But this was the first one where I feel like they really caught their stride, knew what they wanted out of it, and
Yes.
really hit the ground running.
Yeah, I think that something specifically with this film that they missed with the others or the previous ones was Ethan Hunt is still the main character. He is, but they add an element of this team working at accomplishing the impossible mission more so than I think the previous three have had. It's always the previous three were almost more like an Ethan Hunt centered story, which is fine because he is the main character. Here,
Yeah.
you have Benji, you have Brent, you have I forget the girl's name because this is like the last Bond girl for this movie.
Jane.
Jane, thank you.
Yeah.
But you have all these coming together, and specifically with Benji, because Simon Pegg is incredibly funny. He's an incredibly
Oh,
talented
yeah.
comedian. He adds
Oh,
something
yeah.
to this movie that the last few didn't have, which was that comedic presence. Like, hey, Tom Cruise is scaling a building with gloves that stick to the building and will die at any second. That's ridiculous. Here's Simon Pegg for a joke. Like they're actually like playing into the
Yeah.
insanity of it, but it works with it because okay, now the audience isn't going, oh, this is set in a real world with real world stakes. And I'm not saying that the entire franchise doesn't have real world stakes, but now specifically, it really feels like okay, I can be ridiculous because at least we are being funny and we can be lighthearted and we can have these fun moments as opposed to being so dead on serious.
Yeah.
And Brent, I just love Jeremy Renner as an actor in this movie. I like him more than when he plays Hawkeye. I know that's a bold, very bold statement, but I think Brent is just it's a really fun character, and seeing Jeremy Renner play him, like it's really cool.
I
Um,
think, I think Hawkeye, Jeremy Renner's performance as Hawkeye in the TV series tops this for me. But I think
that's
other
fair.
than that, this is definitely one of my favorite Jeremy Renner performances ever as Brent. I loved his character. And again, kind of going back to what you said, this is where it really feels like it starts to feel intertangled.
Yeah,
With finding out that Brent was involved with what happened to Julia, with Ethan's wife, or now
yeah,
ex-wife.
yeah.
um and I will say this movie is the introduction to a concept that is the only real big problem I have with these movies. And that's like I think the weakest part of the Mission Impossible just movies every time is there is always an aspect of the IMF being in danger of being dissolved, being
Sure,
excommunicado, or
sure.
people
Yeah,
not
yeah,
liking the
yeah.
IMF, or people not believing in the IMF. You really don't get that as much in the first movie,
Yeah.
or really the second movie as much.
No, that's
In number
fair.
3, you do get that more, and in every movie from Ghost Protocol on, every single movie, a big portion of time, or maybe not a big portion of time, but a chunk of the story is taken up to be, oh, is the IMF going to get dissolved? Oh, what's going to happen with? I
Um,
personally feel like that gets
mhm,
tiresome towards the end. I know I'm talking about this a little early. I probably should save this conversation for later because I feel like
probably.
it doesn't drag this movie down as much, but it is the introduction to that concept of, oh, we're being excommunicado from the IMF and the US government, because that's why the title is called Ghost Protocol, because they've enacted Ghost Protocol because the senator
Yeah.
was killed and things of that nature. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. I'm comfortable putting that with A, purely just because I think that it's again, it hits its stride with that team aspect. It introduces a lot newer concepts and just has a lot more fun with itself as opposed to its predecessors. Um, it's not my favorite of all of them, but it's definitely very, very good. And I actually find myself rewatching this one. Of the recent ones that have come out of the recent 4, I'm not including Final Reckoning. It'll be 5 after Final Reckoning comes out. I do definitely find myself watching this one the least. Um, but I do think it's very, very good.
okay,
Um,
fair enough. Is there anything else you want to like? Because I
Rogue Nation, Rogue Nation, Rogue Nation, move to Rogue Nation. Put it in that S category. Mr. Brandon, put it in that S.
So Rogue Nation's my favorite Mission
Absolutely.
Impossible movie.
It is. Look,
This is
I
something
go.
me and Carson agree on. I know Carson was trying to move all the others forward. We didn't talk as much as I thought we were about the other ones, but I know why. And that's just because Rogue Nation is the best Mission Impossible movie. It is.
It is
Rogue Nation is
genius.
not just as a Mission Impossible movie, but as a movie, it
It's good.
is
It is really good.
fantastic. It is so you want to talk about like I was talking about how like oh I finally started laughing and I finally started locking in. This movie I like locked in. I was belly laughing. I was having such a phenomenal I was at the edge of my seat at moments like Rogue Nation was
Yeah.
just so like I loved this movie a lot. Like this movie was so enjoyable.
So Rogue Nation was the
Which
action movie.
like sorry, I'm gonna give my typical spiel. So it came out
Go
in
ahead.
2015, so four years after. So one of the shorter jumps between movies. It is 2 hours and 11 minutes, so a little bit shorter than Ghost Protocol, but still like more in that average cat time period for these original. I shouldn't say original, but these earlier Mission Impossible movies, because the last two are like way longer. I think the last one is like 3 hours long, basically.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
this is also the first movie, as mentioned, that was directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who directs all of the last four, because he also directs the last
Final Reckoning.
Mission Impossible movies. Yeah, Final Reckoning. So
Um,
sorry, I just wanted to give that spiel
yeah.
because I've given it for the
No,
rest of
that yeah,
them, but you
you
can go
needed
ahead
to.
and
You definitely needed to. Look, this was the Mission Impossible movie, and honestly, just the movie. I even remember where I watched it for the first time. That made me look at other movies outside of like MCU and DC, and even to a certain extent, like some of the Disney action movies, like Pirates of the Caribbean. Like this was like the first one where I went, "Oh, James Bond is cool as heck," or Ethan Hunt is cool as heck. Ocean's 11 is fire. Because I actually remember watching this on a cruise ship of all places. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I didn't go to bed till like 2 in the morning because it's a cruise ship. Who cares? I'm gonna stay up. And they were showing this on the cruise ship, and I just watched it because I wanted to. I don't know why. I just wanted to, I guess. And I was locked
yeah,
in the whole time because it was so damn good. And even now as an adult, as I've my prepubescent mind has developed and become what it is now, I still stand by. Like it just gets better every time I watch it. I love the story of the syndicate. I think as a force themselves, they are actually very, very threatening. I think that there's
correct.
a stake in this movie that is unparalleled to the other stakes in the predecessors. I think the action is phenomenal. That opening sequence with Tom Cruise on the plane, just hanging off the side of it, is so much fun. And you just sit there and go, God, man, you're gonna kill yourself. And also, this
Well,
is the
you
movie that
he
that
actually hangs off that plane. That is a
actually hangs
really
off the plane. Like there's
practical scene. Granted, he was strapped in, but still, you're hanging off a goddamn airplane.
right. It's a strap that if he let go of the plane, he would be dangling off the back of the plane. Like he's using his
Yeah,
full
he would have
strength to
died.
hold on.
Yeah,
Or at least he still would have hurt himself to some capacity.
yeah, he would have gotten
But
seriously injured.
it is a movie that I love purely just because the story too. Ilsa is a very, very of all the, I guess, quote unquote Bond women, and I don't even classify her as a Bond woman because she's in
I
the next
wouldn't.
three. Like
Yeah.
she's very, very interesting, and her whole storyline in this film specifically is very, very complex and deep, unlike the other Bond women that we've had. I'm still calling her a Bond woman because that is technically what she's supposed to be in these next few
Well,
movies, but it's different.
I mean, she gets way more fleshed out, and granted, it's because she's in 3 movies as opposed to Julia's in 1 and 5 seconds of movies.
Sure.
But like she as a love interest for Ethan Hunt, because that's very clearly what she
Yeah.
um, is so much more enjoy. Her love interest aspect makes so much more sense than with what I didn't like about Julia. Because
Yeah.
she felt way damsel in distressy and way more of a hindrance to Ethan's life. Ilsa felt like the practical love interest. She was also a spy. She is a capable woman of defending herself. She is able to hold her own
Sure.
and doesn't have to have Ethan always worrying about her and looking out for her, even though he does. He doesn't have to the extent in which when Julia gets kidnapped, it basically crumbles everything.
Yeah. Um, it I also again, we talk about that team aspect from Ghost Protocol, but I really like seeing because he wasn't as involved in Ghost Protocol, if at all. I don't even remember. Was Luther in Ghost Protocol? I don't even remember. He
Luther is
was.
in every single
It's just
Luther
like
is in every single movie.
he's in a smaller capacity in Ghost Protocol, isn't he?
I believe Ghost Protocol is his least, the movie he's in the least, other than I think Dead Reckoning, just because he leaves them about halfway through Dead Reckoning.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Luther in this movie with, it's one of my favorite pairings, and I don't know why, but it's seeing Jeremy Renner and Ving Rhames the entire time on screen. Their chemistry is so funny. Like when the
Yeah.
motorcycle chase starts happening, and they run into Ethan, they're just like, "Hey," and they start driving, and Jeremy Renner just looks at Ving Rhames and goes, "You just had to get the Jeep. It's a goddamn motorcycle chase, and you just had to have it." Oh well, now I got a
Yep.
3-point turn in this whole area. It's so funny. And Benji gets a much bigger arc in this, or maybe not so much of an arc as much as he gets a lot more screen time, and you
He
get to
plays
see
a
him.
lot bigger of a role.
You actually care about the emotional weight in this movie. You don't want to see Benji die, and at the end of this movie, he's strapped to a bomb. He's used as a pawn to Solomon Lane's master plan. Um,
Yeah.
and the last, 20 minutes of this, maybe it's 30, from Ethan having to open the thumb drive, open the box to getting it to Solomon, it's one twist after another, after another, proving to Hunley that Ethan was not behind all this and that it was the head of British intelligence that, created the syndicate and the prime minister
Yeah.
actually tried to vanquish that whole thing. And that Solomon turned against him. That's a whole piece of information that's a massive twist, but it's done so well. And Hunley believes him, which also kicks off something for Fallout, which I'll talk about later with Hunley. And, then you get to the table, the scene when they're all three at the table and Benji's strapped to the bomb. Ilsa is just doing what she has to do because she doesn't see a way out of this. She thinks Lane's on top of everything. And then Ethan pulls out of his back corner, like, I memorized every code. You need me alive. Sorry, that's just what, like, that was genius. I didn't see
Oh
that
yeah.
coming.
I also didn't see that coming. I thought that was an absolutely fantastic way to build the stakes, but also give some security to what's going to happen. I also think that Lane, played by Sean Harris, is probably the best villain in
Yeah,
all of these movies as the leader of the syndicate. And
he's very eerie.
also he returns again. I didn't expect to see Lane again, but he returns to be one of the main villains of Fallout as
Yeah,
well. Now his story ends in Fallout pretty much.
for the most part. And then
But
it's that whole dinner scene. It's a big build up to a very fun action sequence at the end. But specifically, Ethan's talks about, when you first saw me and you first met me, you trapped me in a box. Now I'm going to put you in a box. And you don't realize that he's literally meaning I'm going to put you in a box until he's in the
yep,
box. And that's one of my
yep,
favorite shots in that whole movie is him in the box and the music swelling. You see each of them walk up to the glass. It's like, meet the IMF. I'm like, God damn, that's so cool. I love this movie. If you have more, you can talk about it. That's fine. I know I've gone on a lot about this movie. I just love it so much. I love this movie. I think it is exactly what it should have been, and it took the franchise in the direction that it absolutely needed to be taken in.
yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think that I love that Hunley, played by Alec Baldwin, plays a bigger role in this movie as well. I
Yeah.
did like the way that they took his character with, especially like the scene where Ethan has to prove his innocence in front of like the prime minister and things like that, and they're finding out
Sure.
about the syndicate and things of that nature. That was like the only other thing that I just wanted to say, like that like breakdown, and I guess like I love the way that they make you think that Brandt betrays them, and then it all loops back around to be a
Yeah.
masterful plan. And even
Yeah.
Hunley is believing that, oh, Brandt has come to his senses, because all of this
Sure.
is building off of the like Senate hearing of, oh, we need to dismantle the IMF, and there's no
Sure.
trust in them and
Yeah.
things of that nature. Again, going back to one of the
Yeah.
weaker points for me of why do we have to dismantle the IMF in every single goddamn movie. Um but like, yeah, I think that's like I did enjoy that aspect, and it was probably one of the most enjoyable parts of Hunley's character, was just like him
Sure.
realizing that he has to trust Ethan, which then comes back later into Fallout and what happens with his character in Fallout.
Um, go ahead and give us the details for Fallout, because I really do feel like Rogue Nation and Fallout go hand in hand a lot of the way. So
Yeah,
go ahead and give us the
it
details.
very much like obviously it's a very big like if Dead Reckoning and Final Reckoning are a two-parter, Fallout and Rogue Nation are also a two-parter. They still have
Sure.
carry-throughs for each of them, but they're each two-part movies. Now, granted, Rogue Nation still has a little bit more of a conclusive ending, but not as much, because obviously the big driving force of Fallout is the remnants of the syndicate and things of that nature. But
Is
anyway, for the
the
breakdown of Fallout,
Yeah.
Fallout came out in 2018, so only a 3-year gap, which is the shortest gap between Mission Impossible movies. The only shorter gap is between 1 and 2, which was from 1996 to 2000, in a 4-year gap. Now it's only a 3-year gap, also directed by Christopher McQuarrie. Also, the longest Mission Impossible up until this point, with a runtime of 2 hours and 28 minutes. And I personally, and we can disagree and we can move this afterwards, I'm going to put this at the top of A tier.
So here's my thing. I will either let you put it at the bottom of S or the top of A. I'm good with either one. I think Fallout is also a stand. It's leaps and bounds better than Ghost Protocol, in my opinion. I love Fallout. The only thing I guess I don't really like about Fallout is I don't even know. Like Fallout is also just such like a really well-rounded story, but it's also really it's well paced, it's well told. But I also like the idea that, the apostles are like the remnants of the syndicate, and they're people who believe in Solomon Lane. And I feel like Henry Cavill being the villain is the worst kept secret ever, considering it's Henry Cavill and he just looks like a bad guy. I'm sorry. um but the actual
Ironic being that he's
storyline.
also best known for playing Superman, who's the opposite of a villain.
Right. And I actually I will go as far as to say, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I love Solomon Lane as a villain. I do think that John Lark is a much more physically menacing villain. And it might just also be because it's Henry Cavill, but he's a really cool villain. I love the inclusion of Michelle Monaghan at the very end, no matter how short it is. Maybe that's my one gripe, is that they did put her on the poster. And if you were gonna only make her a smaller character at the very end, you should have just left her off the poster. Um,
Yeah.
but I love Elsa's storyline. I love her. Like, I'm just trying to get back good with British intelligence, this, that, whatever. Returning Lane, Vanessa Kirby as an added character. She's very, very fun. And then
I
one of my
think,
favorite things is I love Hunley's like massive turn and change. Like, now he's like for the IMF. He's even part of
yeah.
it. My favorite line of his is, "I'm beginning to see why you guys enjoy this so much." As he's like
Yeah.
holding a gun at John, I'm like, "This is great."
And then unfortunately, this is where his story ends, which does
Right.
kind of suck that he finally came around to it. I think so. For me, the reason that I am putting this at the top of A tier and not the bottom of S tier, because I do really enjoy this movie. I definitely enjoy it more than Ghost Protocol Even though I said that there were very few movies better than Ghost Protocol, I think the reason that I put it lower is because I think this is personally the most egregious example of that anti-IMF ideology. That
Sure.
being the
Yeah.
introduction of Angela Bassett's character with Erica
Yeah.
Sloan, the director of the CIA, who I
Yeah.
believe becomes president. I think that's what her character becomes for or Final Reckoning. I think is what I've heard, is she's now the president. I love Angela Bassett, mainly known for me for How to Get Away with Murder, being one of the main characters in How to Get Away with Murder.
And for both of us, Black Panther technically also.
True. But I think that this is, for me, the most just I really did I enjoyed everything else in this movie except for the big push. And I think that's just because, again, we've had it in every single movie. This felt like the most egregious, like CIA being so like you have that scene of Angela Bassett in the whole reveal of Henry Cavill's character being the mold and things like that. And then Erica Sloan sends in the CIA and it's like, "Oh, great, they're here to help us." And it's like, "Nope, they're actually not here to help you. They're going to take you in and arrest you." I was like, "Okay, this is
Sure.
like
She's just
I
another
get that that's
Hunley to a certain
yeah,
extent.
she is literally just a replacement to Hunley, and I just that's what puts it at the top of A tier as opposed to in S tier, just because I felt like that did actively like hinder my enjoyment. I felt like it was an unnecessary story beat when you already had the betrayal of Walker, Henry Cavill's character, being such a big pivotal thing
Well,
for
and
the
they
movie.
here's the thing, and this is why I do agree with you. That's worse, and it's the more you think about it, they had to find a way to get Henry Cavill. They had to find a way to get John Lark into this team and as a motive onto this. And how do they do that? Well, he's a CIA member and he's trusted. So uh, uh, Angela Bassett's character is like, hey, I don't trust the IMF, but if you're going to continue doing missions, you're sending my guy out there with you. That makes perfect sense to me. That's fine. But then you have to retread the plot beats of I don't trust the IMF. I want the IMF dissolved. I don't even know
Yeah.
if did she specifically say she wants it dissolved, or she just says that she's questioning it and she doesn't trust it without
She
her own
doesn't
man.
like she wants to absorb the IMF into CIA, essentially, which is
Okay.
something we already have had previously as story
Sure.
beats.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
again, that's been a reoccurring thing, and I feel like this is just the most egregious example that, like, I felt like having like John Lark, or Walker, or whoever you want to call him, by being such a like big twist in betrayal, even though, again, worst kept secret was expected. I feel like that was more than enough. You didn't also need the super, like, oh, we want to absorb the IMF into the CIA, whatever. Like, yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
that's just
No,
my thoughts on it. But I think overall,
it's still very, very good, and I think
another,
it's leaps and
yeah,
bounds better than Ghost Protocol.
again, another really big stakes. You also get the reintroduction of Michelle Monaghan's character of Julia, finding out that she's remarried, that she's doing humanitarian work. You have the scene where she's interacting with Luther again, who really is the only character other than Ethan that she has a connection to,
Yeah.
being Luther. And I did really enjoy the scenes like that. Again, the stakes felt big.
Sure.
Not as world ending ish, even though the nukes would have poisoned the watering hole and whatever. It was like a little bit less world endy, I felt like, but still very large scale. You have the amazing helicopter chase that is ultimately the last big set piece of this movie.
Yeah, I and
Which was a lot of
I
fun.
love I like just adding to that, I love that set piece. I think that's the best so far of like all the ending set pieces that they've done is that final like plane chase, the final
Yeah.
fight between Cavill and Cruz. I thought that was incredible. Um
Yeah.
Dead Reckoning, Brandon, go ahead and give us the breakdown.
So Dead Reckoning is the last of the Mission Impossible movies up until this point. It is the longest. It is 20 minutes longer, or roughly 20 minutes longer, sitting at a hefty 2 hours and 43 minutes. Came out in 2023, so 5-year gap between Fallout and Dead Reckoning. Again, directed by Christopher McQuarrie. I probably controversially am going to put this at the bottom of A tier.
I would either put it at the bottom or just above Ghost Protocol, but I would say it's very, very close. I like Dead Reckoning. I like it a lot. I think there are some things that they try to do that I just don't think were needed. But this is where I think the movie's biggest fault is. I don't care about the villain's motivation or the villain. I actually couldn't even tell you what the villain's name is.
The villain is Gabriel, who is it's
Gabriel.
the entity. Technically, it's the entity. The
The
big
entity
villain is
as
the
a villain is cool, but
entity.
as
Um,
an actual physical presence, Gabriel is not that interesting, and I don't really care about him
well,
at all.
because they try to, and I agree with you there, and I'm curious to see what they do with him in the next Mission Impossible movie, because he's built up as like the person who killed, who technically led. I really find it funny because in the first Mission Impossible movie, it's mentioned that Jim is who makes Ethan Hunt who he is, and then in this movie, it feels like they're trying to retroactively say no, Gabriel is the one that made Ethan who he is by killing that random lady who I don't think is even named, and kicking off
Yeah,
Ethan's involvement with the IMF.
yeah,
But the reason I'd put this at the bottom of A tier is just because there is I don't know how long it actually is, but it felt like at least 30 to 45-minute car chase in this movie that takes
yeah,
up a considerable portion of this movie to an
sure.
unnecessary extent.
And I'm
Like,
not gonna
this
say it's
movie
not
had
fun.
the most of a lot of things in this. No, I'm not saying it's not fun. Cut 5 minutes. We did not need to be following this car chase for as long as we
No,
did. Like, this
no,
movie
you
is
did,
the longest of the Mission Impossible movies, and it's because of that goddamn car chase. That
and it's
that
not
car
needed.
chase took up, and it added nothing to the plot. It added nothing to the characters. All it introduced was the fact that Grace can't drive a goddamn car, and that she's
Yeah,
also not trustworthy and kind of like, I found her character a little annoying in the beginning, especially, to
in the
be
beginning,
honest
I
with
found her annoying.
you.
I actually came around to liking her character, and I thought she was a welcome addition after a certain bit. Um, but this is also where I hate it to a certain extent. And this is genuinely a story choice. Look, you have to add stakes, and especially because we're approaching the end, and this is your Infinity War, you have to be able to show that there are consequences in this world.
Which
And
is
we
where you
finally
have the
Ilsa, and that's where you finally
yeah,
have what is essentially your first real character death and moment in this franchise that you actually care about. And it's sad,
yeah,
and like, it's like I hate that they made that choice because they're basically trying to replace her with Haley Atwell in the same movie, and they even sideline her to
correct,
a certain extent, and that's what I hate
correct.
about it. It's not so like if you made her a co-lead to a certain extent, or you still followed her, that's fine, but you basically toss her aside in this movie and then kill her off. And you still care because she's a well-written character and she has moments to shine in this movie. But you're already trying to replace her with Haley Atwell, and I don't care enough about that character. I care about this character because you built her for 2 fucking movies.
Yeah, I mean, Rebecca Ferguson does a phenomenal job in the 3 movies that she appears in playing this character, and that is why her death, I mean, Huntley is technically another big character death, but it really doesn't, he doesn't play that pivotal of a
Not as
role, so when he
not
dies,
as
you
big
don't
as
feel it
Ilsa.
all that much.
Not as big as Ilsa.
So when Ilsa dies, you actually care, and they built up to it in a way that, like, you didn't think that she was gonna die. Like, obviously, they
No.
mentioned, like, Gabriel had mentioned, like, "Oh, it's been foreseen that one of these women is gonna die," but my thought was, "Oh, they're gonna save her. Oh, they're gonna, like, oh, go against the system and break the." No, the AI was right, and that also, to me, really proves not that Gabriel is a menacing villain, but that the
The entity.
entity is a menacing
The
villain
entity is very
that
yeah.
you think, at least personally, I thought, oh, they're going to circumvent this and everyone's going to make it out of this happy. No, the entity predicted it and the entity was right. Like, that is just a fact of the matter.
Yeah, I can't wait for the entity and Final Reckoning to I'm waiting for the line, "Ethan, you will die." I can't wait for that to happen, and Ethan's actually gonna die. I can't wait for it because I already
Do
know
you
that's
think
coming.
Ethan's gonna die?
Oh, I think Ethan's gonna die. There is
See,
no shot that he makes it out of this franchise alive.
I would not have a problem with him dying. The only character I hope that Benji and Luther make it through, personally, just because I feel like I didn't necessarily cry at Ilsa's death, but I felt sad.
Yeah.
If Luther or Benji died, I'd be devastated. I'd be
I
crying
think
in the theater.
specifically if Luther died. I would be sad if Benji
Yeah.
died, but I feel like if
Well,
Luther died, because he's been there since the beginning, it would hurt a lot.
Luther is the only character other than Ethan Hunt that has been in every single Mission Impossible movie to varying degrees, but he's still been in every single Mission Impossible movie. Benji first appeared, I believe it was the end of the second movie,
Third
in a very
third
brief
movie.
third. He appeared, that's right. He appeared very briefly in a cameo at the end of the third movie. And then
Yeah.
plays a very pivotal role in the latter movies after he becomes a field agent.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Look, I do like this movie though. I can't say that it's bad. I think it's leaps and bounds better than that first Mission Impossible movie.
oh
But
yeah.
I will also
Oh yeah.
I will also add the reason it is lower is this is also kind of where you're starting to tail that line like Fast and the Furious, where okay, how unbelievable is too unbelievable? And I'm not saying it's comparable to
Yeah.
Fast 9 where they take a Honda into space. They take a car into space, Brandon. Fast and the Furious took a car into space. You know, eh, I'm not saying it's that level of unbelievable, but you're starting to kind of toe that line. Um, Again, the reason this movie's saved and where it is because of the writing and the story itself. The entity is a menacing presence, and you really do feel the finality of this universe coming to an end with this film. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that overall it is one of the better villains if you count the entity as the villain, obviously, as opposed to Gabriel as being the villain. Because I think Gabriel
sure.
was, I agree with you. Gabriel just kind of felt like a conduit for the entity, and I'm curious to
Yeah.
see how big of a role he plays in Final Reckoning. Um, we also had like the like White Widow played a really big role. And I
Yeah.
also that's another through line that's never explicitly mentioned technically. But the White Widow being Max's daughter, and Max being from I
Yeah.
believe it was Mission Impossible 2 or 1. Can't
You
remember which
sure.
one.
It doesn't matter. I know what you're
But
talking about,
being the gun runner, or I guess arms dealer that really helped out um Ethan Hunt, who he then basically betrays and turns in. Finding out that the White Widow, we found this out previously, but I think that we haven't really talked about the White Widow as a character because that's also a really big returning through line. And I think using her the way that they did in this movie, I actually really enjoyed, with her being kind of like scared and just kind of doing what she needs to survive. It felt like she
Sure.
was in the other movies, she felt much more like a in control presence and a leader in the black market space. In this movie, she
Sure.
very much felt like scared and like I'm doing this because I need to. And that's I mean, Vanessa Kirby is a great actress, but I just felt like they her involvement in this movie felt like one of the better involvements, mainly because this was probably I think probably her most screen time as well.
Yeah. Well, that's it. That's the ranking. That's how I feel, and
Yep.
I feel pretty confident with that. It's
Yep, to
it's
run
good.
everyone back through before we end this episode. At S tier, we have Rogue Nation. We both universally agree that that is the best Mission Impossible movie. In A tier, we have Fallout at the top of A tier, Ghost Protocol in the next A tier, and Dead Reckoning being in the bottom of A tier. In B tier, we have Mission Impossible 1 at the top of B tier, and Mission Impossible 3 at the bottom of B tier, and all the way down skipping to D tier as a not really enjoyable experience of a movie. We have Mission Impossible 2.
Yeah. All in all, I think
I'm
this
going
franchise
to, yep, I'm
all
going to
in
go
all,
ahead and switch back to this view.
I think that this franchise is a lot of fun. I think that they did a good job, especially in the latter half of the franchise, just building out this world and building characters that we actually care about and want to see. Um, I think it's a lot of fun. I'm very excited for Final Reckoning. I hope that they, do it justice. They do a good job, ending this franchise the way that, they built it out to be. And honestly, I'm going to take a photo of that list when we're done here, because I'm going to rank Final Reckoning at the end of the review next week, because I
Yeah.
need to.
Yeah.
I need to do that for my
Yeah,
own
I think
sanity.
we absolutely will. Next week will be the actual review. We're gonna get more into an actual review as opposed to a ranking. But I feel like
Yeah,
at the end of that review, or maybe the beginning, we'll talk about this offline. But at one point in the review, we will rank Final Reckoning on
sure,
this list that we have.
sure. Well, I know it's been a long week. I thank you for watching those movies, Brandon. I thank you
Yes,
for indulging me in that.
I Well, when I get off of this, we had a break from One Piece last week. There was no One Piece episode last week, which hurt me. It was very devastating. So instead, I posted my Skeleton Crew review this
Sure.
week. After I get off of this, I get to watch another episode of One Piece. So I am very, very hyped. And I get to make
Mm,
dinner because
yeah.
unfortunately, this episode is going up way later than normal because it is currently 5:12 on a Sunday. Typically, we post at noon, but
Yep.
scheduling is a pain in the butt sometimes, and we're
And then
here.
obviously at 9 o'clock tonight, we get Last of Us, which I'm going to watch live for the first time since the second season, or since episode 2 of season 2, because I've been insanely busy. So I get to actually watch that
Yeah,
live. I'm
fair
really
enough.
excited. But yeah, Brandon, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, again, I'm just like, I have a lot of things that I need to. It has been a very busy week of watching things for me, and it is going to continue to be a very busy week because this upcoming week is Memorial Day weekend, and my family's coming up to visit. So it's going to be fun
Love it.
balancing that.
Love
But
that.
yeah,
Let's wrap this sucker up. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching, or thanks for listening, depending on where you're watching us at. You can find us on all streaming platforms, including Apple Podcast, Amazon Podcast, Spotify, YouTube. You can find us everywhere. You can find us on all social media platforms, including under @NerdyNimrods. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for talking nerdy with us. And with that being said, stay nerdy.